Chapter 272. What new spell did my Amy learn today? Meg asked with a curious smile as he opened the door and welcomed Amy in. The spell Amy learned must be super powerful. After all, Master Crassus is so powerful. Yabamiya smiled as she carried out the dishes. Crassus' power was deeply imprinted in her mind. Sally stood off to the side with a curious look in her eyes. Amy's talent in magic was one of the best she had ever seen. The previous person she looked up to was the elven princess. Her talent and cultivation speed far exceeded that of the younger generation, and she became a legend. She was only in her 20s, but she was already at the top of the entire continent. Master Crassus said it's called the Flaming Wheels. But I've only learned a little bit of it, and I can't fly yet, Amy said with a smile. Flaming Wheels. Meg raised an eyebrow. Why did this name sound so familiar? Wasn't it one of the 3 treasures of that brat, Najah? What was Crassus thinking? How did he come up with such a name? Yes, it's the Flaming Wheels. Father, I'll show you. It's super fun, Amy said excitedly with a nod. Sure. Meg nodded with a smile. He wanted to see what was the difference between the Flaming Wheels and the Flaming Wheels. You have to stand back a little, Amy reminded him. A serious expression appeared on her little face as she chanted a string of magic incantations. Finally, she yelled, Flaming Wheels, appear. 2 balls of flames suddenly appeared beneath Amy's feet. Amy, who was standing on the ground, slowly rose over a dozen centimeters into the air. The flames beneath her feet spewed downward as if she had installed a flamethrower beneath her feet. I didn't know it could do that. Meg's eyes lit up. It was only the 2nd day of school, and Amy had already learned how to fly. As expected, the first step to becoming a prodigy wasn't to learn how to walk, everyone started from flying. Furthermore, Amy had only just begun to learn this spell. The flames she was spewing had become a spinning wheel. With Amy's learning speed, it was only a matter of time before she became a master. That's awesome. Amy can fly, Yabamiya praised as she looked at Amy with astonishment. Is this the legendary melee magic? Sally was also looking at Amy, who was levitating in the air with the help of flames. Although she could only maintain a height of 10 centimeters in the air, as a 7th-level magician, she knew how difficult it was to control the magic on the surface of the body after releasing it. This was also the reason why there were only a few magicians on the continent who specialized in melee magic, even though Crassus had practiced it to the peak. Meow, Ugly Duckling ran around Amy a few times excitedly, but it didn't dare to get too close due to the high temperature of the flames. I'm going to fall. Amy levitated for about 30 seconds before her body swayed, and the flames beneath her feet were extinguished. She looked at Meg with anticipation in her eyes, and asked, Father, is Amy super awesome too? Yes, Amy is super awesome. She can learn all kinds of magic in an instant. Meg stroked Amy's hair with a gratified expression. Amy's talent really did surprise even him. If she could keep it up, her rate of improvement would most likely be even faster than his rate of recovery. He suddenly felt a little pressured. This was pressure from his daughter. All right, go wash your hands and eat. We have braised chicken and rice and tofu pudding for lunch, Meg said with a smile. Okay. Amy nodded obediently before picking up Ugly Duckling. She then bade farewell to Yabamiya and Sally before walking toward the kitchen. After washing her hands, Amy turned to Meg with a serious expression and said, Father, why don't I eat a little later? That way, they'll know how delicious braised chicken is, and they'll order more of it. Alright, then let's have a tofu pudding first. Meg placed Ugly Duckling's lunch on the ground, and nodded with a smile. It seemed that Ugly Duckling also enjoyed having customers watch her eat. Alright. Amy nodded before climbing onto a chair. She turned to Ugly Duckling, who was about to dig in with its tongue sticking out, and said, "Ugly Duckling, you have to eat less. Otherwise, you're going to put on weight again." Meow. Ugly Duckling nodded with an earnest expression before lying down on the ground and eating the tofu pudding with a joyful expression. In the blink of an eye, it had already forgotten about Amy's words. "Let's eat," Meg said to Yabamiya and Sally before sitting down and picking up his chopsticks. Yabamiya held a rujiamo in her hand, and took a bite. Her golden dragon tail swayed gently behind her back, and she had an expression of enjoyment on her face. She was no longer embarrassed by her tail. Sally sat down and ate her Yangzhou fried rice in small bites. The braised chicken was delicious, but she still didn't want to eat too much meat. Of course, the price of 800 copper coins was also one of the main reasons why she couldn't afford it. If she ate one, she would only have one tofu pudding for breakfast and one tofu pudding for dinner. Outside the restaurant, 2 long lines had already stretched all the way to the square. Both sides were in a cold war because of the one-star exchange, and there was a rare moment of silence. However, this eerie silence made it seem as if both sides were preparing for a big move, so the atmosphere became even more tense and tense. Crassus didn't come in the morning, and he was a little puzzled by this scene. "My lord, the savory party shamelessly gave the sweet tofu pudding a 1-star rating today. If this continues, our favorite sweet tofu pudding will definitely fall to the bottom of the Aiden Square food rankings," the young man standing behind Crassus complained angrily. "There's actually something like this?" Crassus raised his eyebrows. When he arrived, he saw many magic screens with the names of all the restaurants and dishes. He didn't expect them to shamelessly give the sweet tofu pudding a 1-star rating. It would be too infuriating if such a delicious sweet tofu pudding didn't have a good name on the rankings. "How did you deal with them?" Crassus asked the young man again. "We also gave their savory tofu pudding a 1-star rating," the young man said smugly. Well done." Giving him a taste of his own medicine. Crassus nodded with satisfaction. He turned to look at Julian with a cold smile, and said, "Savory tofu pudding, a 1-star rating. I'm very good at hurting each other." Julian cracked a cold smile, and the air seemed to have become a little colder. Lulu, look, there are so many people lining up over there. There must be a lot of good food. Let's go and have a look." Cece pointed at the long line in front of Mamie restaurant with a green onion pancake in her hand, and said, "That's right. But, we've been eating for the entire morning, and we haven't even lasted 15 minutes. Lulu looked at Cece with a resigned expression. She was still carrying some food in her hands. "But I'm not full yet. Let's go." Cece pouted and looked at him coquettishly. Chapter 273. Boss, did they really come to Chaos City? At the western city gate of Chaos City, 6 men dressed as hunters with crossbows strapped to their waists and longbows strapped to the backs of their horses were lining up to enter the city. A young man among them asked the bearded man standing at the front of the line. "We followed them all the way here, so they should have entered the city. That white cat is the most gluttonous, so it would definitely enter a big city like this. That stupid bear listens to everything she says. After we enter the city, we just have to ask around about the place with the most food and we will definitely find them." The bearded man nodded in response. His voice was a little low and hoarse, and there was a faint layer of crimson over his dark brown eyes as he looked up at the words, "Chaos City," above the city gate. "Boss, I heard that Chaos City is very strict. Will someone come out to stop us?" someone behind him asked. "As long as we act fast enough, that won't be a problem. We don't have to keep them alive anyway." The bearded man smiled, revealing a mouthful of sharp yellow teeth. "That's right. These are the last 2. It's about time that the curse on our brethren completely dissipated. Everyone's smiles were also a little cruel. Vice President Robert, that's the restaurant over there. Luther and Robert were walking side by side as they pointed at Amy's. He had volunteered to lead the way for Robert, but a surprised look appeared on his face at the sight of the long line in front of the restaurant. The restaurant hasn't even opened yet, and there are already so many people lining up. Robert was also quite surprised to see this. It was very rare to see such a scene in the Aden Square. Only when a restaurant was holding a promotion or event would there be a long line in front of the restaurant. Even the restaurants at the top of the Aden Square food rankings would only have people lining up during the peak hours of the night. Vice President, I think this restaurant must have hired someone. They must have guessed that we're going to verify their authenticity, so they've arranged for so many people to line up. Look, those people aren't even saying anything. Luther was a little angry. He didn't think that Meg would have made such thorough preparations. However, there was a limit to everything, and this abnormal situation was even more suspicious. That's not necessarily true. Robert shook his head and quickened his pace toward the long line. He walked over to Brandley and bowed slightly as he said, Master Brandley, do you always come here for lunch? Oh, it's Robert. Brandley turned around to look at Robert, and was also a little surprised. He nodded with a smile, and said, That's right. I heard that Mr. Mac is releasing a new dish. If I'm late, I won't be able to eat it. This, the person that the Vice President treats with such respect is actually also in the team. A hint of surprise appeared on Luther's face upon seeing this. He didn't know who Brandley was, but he could tell from the Grey Temple insignia on his robe that he was most likely a member of the Grey Temple. In the beginning, Robert had also thought that the restaurant had rigged the voting system, but he still wanted to verify it in person. To his surprise, there was a long line in front of the restaurant, and Brandley was also in the line. One had to realize that Brandley was a highly revered magic caster in the Grey Temple, and there was no way that he would stoop so low as to be a prop for a restaurant. Judging from the attire and disposition of the people in the line, most of them didn't lack money. No restaurant's promotional event could pique their interest, so Robert couldn't help but ask, Is the food in this restaurant really that good? You'll know once you try it. If you want to line up, then hurry up. You'll regret it if you don't get to eat it. Brandley shook his head with a mysterious smile. I trust your taste buds. Robert nodded with a smile before making his way to the back of the line. Master Robert is also lining up. The surprise on Luther's face became even more pronounced. He quickly made his way over to Robert and whispered, Vice President. Robert interrupted Luther's words with a serious expression and said, Then line up behind me, Luther. Whether or not it's worth this price can really be liked by everyone, we'll have to try it before we can judge. All right. Luther swallowed the rest of his words and stood behind Robert. The reason why he respected the vice president was because of his serious attitude. Looks like this restaurant owner knows a lot of people of high status. Otherwise, he would have been able to invite someone from the Grey Temple to support him, Luther thought to himself. He still didn't believe that Meg's expensive food would be able to attract so many people to line up. Little brother, why are we splitting into two teams? Robert and the young man in front of him asked curiously. Normally, there would only be one line in the line, but there were two long lines in front of the restaurant. Furthermore, both sides seemed to be hostile toward each other, and the atmosphere was rather tense and oppressive. I can tell that this is your first time here, right? Let me tell you, this line is very particular. Amy's has a delicacy called tofu pudding. It has two flavors, sweet and savory. Even though it sounds like the same dish, the two flavors are actually two different dishes. The savory tofu pudding is unforgettable, and as for the sweet tofu pudding, it's so sweet that it's greasy. You guys made the right choice by choosing the savory tofu pudding line, Jamie said with a smile. As a veteran savory tofu pudding supporter, he had the responsibility and obligation to inject new blood into the savory party. Savory tofu pudding is simply inedible. It's so salty that you'll definitely want to cough after eating it. However, sweet tofu pudding is different. It's sweet and refreshing. It's sweet but not greasy. It's simply a delicacy. The little old man standing at the back of the line was a little indignant. He looked at Robert with a smile and said, "Joining the sweet party is the best choice you've made. I'm warning you guys, you better stop your shameless behavior of giving 1 star to savory tofu pudding. Otherwise, don't blame us for being rude. You guys started the war, so the sweet party won't be afraid." The conversation between the two of them successfully ignited a war between the sweet and savory parties, and the two sides instantly descended into a war of words again. What kind of delicacy must it be to give the customers such a sense of honor? Robert's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this. He was also looking forward to the so-called delicacy that everyone was talking about. Perhaps he could try both of them. Wow! Robert was instantly dumbstruck upon seeing this. He had never seen customers arguing over different tastes in a restaurant. Furthermore, it looked like a fight was about to break out. Chapter 274. As soon as he said that, the noisy crowd at the entrance fell into silence again. Everyone's eyes fell on the two of them. Although everyone was arguing, it wasn't that they weren't angry. However, since the boss at the front of the line didn't make a move, and the people at the back of the line didn't make a move either, the situation was still under control. However, judging from the attitude of this couple, were they going to fight over whether to eat the sweet or salty tofu pudding? If it was more serious, wouldn't they have to go their separate ways? However, this couple really looked like Beauty and the Beast. Although the difference in height was cute, the petite girl looked especially small when standing in front of the bear-like man. One of his arms was as thick as her leg. How can that be? Cece, I really love you. But you know that I don't like sweet things, so I chose the salty tofu pudding. Lulu shook her head and said with a smile. Liar, if you love me, why can't you love my taste? You know that I like sweet things the most. Cece shook her head and looked even more sad. That's right, girl. This kind of man who doesn't know how to be considerate of women doesn't deserve to stay. Let's just forget about it. The old man at the front of the line echoed. That's right. Can there be any good people in the salty party? Look at how he defended himself. He doesn't have any sincerity at all. That's right. A man who only knows how to reason with women is destined to be single for the rest of his life. He wins the fight for face, but loses the fight for wife. The people in the sweet party all agreed. They weren't afraid of making a big deal out of it. Young man, don't worry. There is no lack of women in this world. We don't need this kind of woman who likes to eat sweet things. That's right. Salty is light. Salty is faith. How can you abandon your faith for a woman? That's right. As long as you stay, I'll introduce my granddaughter to you. The people in the salty party also started to give tit for tat and tried to persuade him. The malice from the single people was magnified infinitely at this moment. Anyway, those who were here to watch the show would never mind making a big deal out of it. Everyone looked at the two of them, waiting to see how they would choose. The man looked tall and strong. He definitely wouldn't give in to a woman in front of so many people. That would be too embarrassing. Under everyone's gaze, Lulu still had only one person in his eyes. He took a step forward and gently placed his hand on her head. He said in a pampering tone, "Silly girl, no matter what you like to eat, of course I can accept it. If you want me to eat something sweet, then I'll line up at the end and eat something sweet with you. T-test-t-t-test-tease, S-S-S-S-S-S." The expressions of the people who were encouraging them to break up suddenly froze. You'll have to wait for a while for other dishes. I'll wait for a while. Robert looked at the warm smile on Yabamiya's face, and a hint of a smile appeared on his face. Okay. Yabamiya nodded, and then continued to talk to the customers behind him. 5 points for this kind of service is not a problem. Robert nodded thoughtfully. This waiter was not very enthusiastic, but the appropriate distance and the warm smile made him feel a lot better. It was very good service. Now, all that's left is the taste. To be able to arouse such a strong response from the customers, this restaurant might really become a dark horse in this competition. Robert looked toward the kitchen expectantly. A faint, alluring aroma wafted through the air. Is Little Boss eating the new dish? Everyone's attention was drawn to Amy, who was sitting at a table in front of the counter. There was a bowl of braised chicken in front of her, and a bowl of moonlight rice in front of her. Chapter 275. Almost all of the customers in the restaurant had their eyes fixed on Amy and the braised chicken in front of her. The alluring aroma of chicken soup wafted through the air, and they couldn't help but crane their necks to see just what kind of delicacy could give off such an alluring aroma. I'm going to start eating. Amy picked up a piece of golden chicken with her chopsticks and took a bite. As she chewed on the fragrant chicken, a drop of golden red chicken soup dripped onto her lips, and she swallowed it after chewing a few times. She then licked her lips with her adorable little tongue, and a joyful expression appeared on her face. Gulp. The sound of saliva being swallowed instantly rang out in the restaurant. It's delicious. Amy nodded with a sincere expression on her little face. She finished the remaining half of the chicken before putting a piece of shiitake mushroom into her mouth. She then ladled a few spoonfuls of chicken soup over her rice before putting a spoonful of rice into her mouth. She chewed happily, and the more she ate, the more delicious the food became. Even her body was swaying uncontrollably from side to side. Ah, I want to eat. How can Little Boss eat so well and look so good? I can't take it anymore, I'm starving. Boss, I want a braised chicken and rice. I only brought 8 gold coins, so I won't be able to eat tofu pudding today. I want a braised chicken and rice as well. All of the customers were instantly filled with awe and admiration. The customers who had been hesitant at the sight of the 800 copper coins per serving immediately began to place their orders. They were all looking forward to seeing how delicious Amy's braised chicken and rice would be. What a brilliant marketing strategy. Many of the customers probably won't be able to resist the temptation of letting this little girl eat a braised chicken and rice dish in front of everyone. Robert looked at Meg in the kitchen with admiration in his eyes. This was countless times better than standing at the entrance of the restaurant and yelling out loud. He looked at Amy and couldn't help but gulp as he thought to himself, how about I also get a braised chicken and rice dish? It definitely won't be that good. She's definitely faking it. She's definitely faking it. Luther thought to himself, but he couldn't look away from Amy and the braised chicken and rice dish. Cece's eyes lit up at the sight of Amy, and she turned to Lulu with an expectant look in her eyes. Wow, what an adorable little girl. Let's have many babies in the future, Lulu. Alright, you'll be in charge of giving birth, and I'll be in charge of raising them. I'll let them spoil you when they grow up. Lulu nodded with a smile, but there was a trace of heartache in the depths of his eyes. Okay, I love children the most. Then when we can stop, we must have a lot of babies. Cece. She looked at Amy's to herself, and she was of them. Lulu looked at the half-eaten scallion pancake in one hand and the other hand. She then looked at Cece, who was trying to make herself look even more pitiful. Lulu nodded with a hint of exasperation in her eyes. Lulu, you're the best. Cece looked at Lulu with a touched expression. Lulu turned to Yabamiya, who had just walked up to her, and asked, "Can I buy that little girl's food?" "I'm sorry, but you can only order the braised chicken when there's a seat available." "You can order it after you're seated," Yabamiya said with a smile as she shook her head. Cece looked at Yabamiya with a sincere expression, and said, "All right, thank you. Please leave a copy for us." "Don't worry, I'm sure you'll be able to order it." Yabamiya smiled. Even though many customers had ordered the braised chicken under Amy's persuasion, there were still a large number of customers who didn't order it. Not every customer was wealthy enough to order a braised chicken and rice that cost 800 copper coins. Most of them had to save up for a few days before making up their minds to order a tofu pudding or a rujiamo. "Sure." Cece nodded with a smile on her face again. Yabamiya walked over to the next customer with a smile. She was a little envious of the love between this couple, but that kind of thing probably won't happen to me, right? Yabamiya thought to herself as she shook her head to get rid of these messy thoughts. She continued to serve the customers efficiently. More and more delicacies were brought out of the kitchen, and the alluring aroma wafted through the restaurant. Even though they were all different types of food, the aroma was very distinct, and the customers in the line were getting hungrier and hungrier. Even though there was a lot of noise outside, the customers seemed to have a tacit understanding after entering the restaurant. Everyone is quietly enjoying the food, and the occasional sound is mostly of praise. This atmosphere is indeed very comfortable, Robert thought as he looked at the customers in the restaurant. Robert thought to himself as he observed the customers in the restaurant. His gaze landed on Harrison, who was enjoying his rujiamo so much that the fat on his body was jiggling uncontrollably. He nodded slightly. "And the food should be very delicious." The pleasure of enjoying food is uncontrollable, and it's not easy to fake. The fact that all the customers are satisfied with the taste of the food shows how amazing it is. Such a restaurant can sell breakfast for more than 300 people in one morning. With the unit price of each dish, they can get a turnover of 150,000 yuan. Now, it seems to be a matter of course. Robert already had a rough idea in his mind. Perhaps this restaurant would completely change the structure of the Aden cuisine rankings. It's fake, it's fake. Luther tried to hypnotize himself as he stared at the rujiamo in the hands of a customer. Swallowing had become a habitual action, and he couldn't control himself at all. The first batch of customers left one after another. They knew that Mr. Mac's business was good, but there were too few seats. Therefore, the customers all consciously focused on enjoying the food during the meal, paid the bill, and left, leaving the customers who were tortured by the temptation of the food behind them to sit down and enjoy the food. After sitting down, Robert picked up the menu on the table. The cowhide cover was very comfortable to the touch. It was hard to imagine that someone would use such a fine piece of cowhide as the cover of a menu, and there was one on every table. The style was perfectly reflected in the details. After looking at the menu for a while, Robert flipped it over and handed it to Luther, who was sitting in the middle of the table. "Luther, take a look and see what you want to eat. Come with me today, and I'll pay the bill." "How can I do that, Vice President?" Luther hurriedly waved his hand, but he didn't dare to rush to pay the bill. After all, as a low-level worker in the Food Association, his monthly salary was only 4,000 copper coins. A portion of braised chicken would cost him 1/5 of his salary. He really couldn't afford it. "How do you know if it's really good if you don't try it?" "We have to work with a serious attitude," Robert said earnestly. He could see that Luther still didn't believe in this restaurant. Luther looked at the menu for a while and hesitated, then pointed at the rujiamo and said, "Then I'll have a rujiamo." Here's a notice. The first book group, 145,658,434, is full, so Whisper has opened a second group. Those who haven't joined can join the second group, 453,615,125. Amy, if you're in the first group, don't join the second group. I'm so poor that I can only open 1,000 groups. Chapter 276. I'll have a braised chicken. And a sweet tofu pudding. That rigiamo is the one with the meat in it, right? I'll have one too. That Yangzhou fried rice is the one with the rainbow in it, right? I'll have one too. Cece flipped through the menu and ordered happily. After ordering everything, she put down the menu and looked at Lulu, who was sitting across from her, and asked, "Lulu, what do you want to eat?" "I'll have your leftovers." Lulu shook her head with a smile. She closed the menu and looked at Yabamiya. "That's all." "Sure, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded with a smile and walked to the next customer. A braised chicken and rice, a rigiamo, a sweet tofu pudding, and a savory tofu pudding. Robert closed the menu and looked at Yabamiya. Yabamiya shook his head slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. There's only one tofu pudding per person. My friend and I will each have one." Robert pointed at Luther and said, "Vice. I don't need tofu pudding, really." Luther hurriedly waved his hand. However, when he heard Robert refer to him as a friend, it seemed that he didn't want to reveal his identity, so he swallowed back the words, "President." "Since we're here, of course we have to try this mesmerizing tofu pudding. That's all." Robert smiled as he looked at Yabamiya. "Sure, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded with a smile and turned to walk into the kitchen. "There's a couple who are so sweet today. They talk like they're giving out candy," Yabamiya said with a smile as he walked into the kitchen. Sally happened to be washing dishes as well. "They're giving out dog food in broad daylight." Meg also turned to look at the dining room when he heard that. He just so happened to see a burly man carefully brushing the bangs of his girlfriend's hair. His affectionate gaze was enviable, and he also had the urge to kick the dog food over. Sally also turned to look, and her eyes lit up. However, her expression was still cold and calm. "Feed her dog food." "What's that, boss?" Yabamiya asked with a perplexed expression as she picked up 2 bowls of braised chicken. "This." Meg opened his mouth. There was no such thing as a single dog in this world, so it was a bit difficult to explain the concept of dog food. After thinking for a while, he explained, "It's the behavior of those who are in love and forced to show their affection in front of those who don't have a partner. It's called dog food. This is my hometown slang." "I see." Yabamiya nodded thoughtfully, then asked curiously, "But boss, do people in your hometown call themselves dogs?" "This." Meg was stumped again. The term single dog wasn't insulting. It was usually self-deprecating, but the term dog sounded a little strange, so Meg smiled wittily and said, "Serve the dishes to the guests first." "Okay." Yabamiya immediately quickened his pace and walked out of the kitchen. When Meg retracted his gaze, he happened to glance at Luther. He had an excellent memory, so he immediately recognized him as the worker from the Food Association who came to promote the tickets for the Aiden Square food competition the other day. The man sitting opposite him was dressed in an exquisite suit. Judging from Luther's attitude, it was very likely that he was one of the higher-ups in the Food Association. What are they doing here? Are they suspecting that I'm cheating? Meg's brows furrowed slightly as he pondered the reason for their visit. However, on second thought, Mag turned back to continue cooking with a nonchalant expression. Anyone with a discerning eye would be able to tell the difference between real and fake with a single glance. If someone was still looking for trouble after tasting his dish, then that meant that someone was trying to make things difficult for him. One dish after another was brought out by Yabamiya from the kitchen, and delivered to each and every customer with precise precision. Sally was also very efficient at tidying up the table. She casually cast a water magic spell, and the greasy table was instantly cleaned up without any water stains. A restaurant with only 3 people can operate so efficiently. This owner has a very good eye for waitresses, Robert couldn't help but exclaim. Robert couldn't help but praise. He looked at Mag, who was operating several kitchenware in the kitchen at once, and he was even more expectant of the dishes that were about to be served. Your braised chicken and rice, rugiamo, and sweet and savory tofu pudding, Yabamiya said with a smile as she walked over with a tray and placed down the dishes. Thank you. Robert nodded slightly, but his eyes were already drawn to the dishes in front of him. Even though he had already seen the other customers eat a lot, when the dishes were placed in front of him, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. The rich aroma of the chicken soup was enhanced to the extreme by another unknown aroma. The 2 bowls of white and tender things were most likely the sweet tofu pudding and the savory tofu pudding. The faint fragrance of tofu pudding wafted into his nose. The rugiamo in the brown paper bag also had a very special aroma. He wondered what kind of cooking method was used to create such a delicious dish. Luther, do you want the sweet tofu pudding or the savory tofu pudding? Robert asked. You can choose first, master. I'm fine with either. Seeing as Robert had already made the decision, Luther didn't continue to argue. However, he still smiled. All right, then I'll choose the savory tofu pudding. Robert smiled as he picked up the bowl of tofu pudding with orange sauce, pickled mustard, garlic, and chopped green onions. He preferred the savory tofu pudding to the sweet tofu pudding. Luther's eyes were completely drawn to the rugiamo in front of him. The aroma of the braised meat wafted into his nose. This was a wonderful taste that he had never tasted before. He didn't dare to say that he had eaten at all of the restaurants in the Aden Square, but he had at least visited all of them. However, he had never seen a restaurant that could arouse such a strong appetite. His stomach was already rumbling when he saw the other customers enjoying the food in front of him. Now, it was getting even more restless. I think, maybe it's not that good. Luther held on to his last bit of stubbornness. Then, he picked up the rugiamo with his hands and took a bite. There were 2 layers of soft and fragrant baiji bread sandwiched between the tender braised meat. He bit into it, and delicious gravy flowed out. Every single taste bud on the tip of his tongue seemed to be in ecstasy. In that instant, Luther felt as if his life had been elevated to a higher level. He had fallen into a trap of endless delicious braised meat, and the delicious taste danced on the tip of his tongue. This is a delicacy that should never exist in this world. What kind of superb cooking skills does he have to be able to cook such delicious food? This is light. A light that illuminates the entire Aden Square. Such delicious food should be number 1 on the Aden Square food rankings board. Luther roared in his heart. 300 copper coins for a small rugiamo. Is it worth it? It is. Chapter 277. Gulp. Luther's throat moved as he swallowed the rugiamo. The delicious taste of meat filled his mouth, and after swallowing, it transformed into a violent warm current that flowed through his bloodstream. His blood was flowing at an accelerated rate, and he felt as if he had been rejuvenated. Ah! Luther couldn't help but let out a satisfied sigh. The deliciousness was already at the pinnacle, but he didn't expect it to bring such a special and comfortable enjoyment to his body. He had never eaten such delicious and special food in his life. Look at you, it must be delicious, right? Robert, who was picking up a piece of chicken, asked Luther, whose expression was a little exaggerated. At first, he was very certain that the restaurant was cheating, but now, he looked like he had completely fallen for it. The contrast was a little comical. Yes. Luther nodded. His mouth was stuffed with Ruggiemo, and he couldn't stop eating. In that case, let me try this braised chicken and rice as well. Let me see what's so special about it. Robert put the piece of chicken into his mouth, and took a light bite. The fragrant chicken melted in his mouth along with the thick chicken broth. The extremely delicious chicken broth and the refreshing chicken had completely overturned his understanding of braised chicken. Robert had been transferred to the Food Association from the City Lord's Castle, so he had an extremely high standard for food. He had eaten at all of the restaurants in the Aden Square in his early years, and was a frequent customer of many of them. Even though this chicken is a turkey, it's a little different from normal turkey. The chicken is a little tighter, but it doesn't feel like it's too old. The heat is just right, and the chicken broth ensures that it's tender and fragrant. The chicken broth is also extremely delicious. I've never tasted such delicious chicken broth before. It's rich, but not greasy. It's definitely a top-grade delicacy. Robert's eyes completely lit up as he appraised the dish. You don't know this, but the braised chicken and rice isn't just delicious, the shiitake mushrooms are also extremely precious. The reason why the chicken broth has such an unparalleled flavor is because of the shiitake mushrooms, which can be sold for 100 gold coins each, and Mr. Mac put a total of 4 shiitake mushrooms in this bowl. Jimmy, who was sitting at the same table as them, chimed in with a smile on his face as he brought up the things that he had learned from Carl that morning. Mushroom. Robert looked into the bowl curiously before picking up a piece of shiitake mushroom. It was a type of mushroom that he had never seen before, and a unique aroma wafted through the air. The unique aroma of the braised chicken came from this mushroom, and it left a deep impression on him. Shiitake mushrooms that cost 100 gold coins. Robert put the shiitake mushroom into his mouth with some suspicion. He took a light bite, and the chicken broth that had been absorbed immediately overflowed. The ultimate freshness was best explained by the combination of the two fragrances. This taste is better than thousands of seasonings. No mushroom can have such a delicious taste. It's enough to be called the king of mushrooms. Robert exclaimed in admiration. He had never heard of such a delicious taste before. From this, it could be seen how precious these shiitake mushrooms were. 100 gold coins for one was not an exaggeration. Imitating Amy's previous method, Robert also poured a few spoonfuls of chicken soup over the rice. Then, he scooped a spoonful of rice that had been dyed golden red and put it into his mouth. As he chewed, the delicious chicken soup and sweet rice blended together perfectly. He swallowed it in one gulp and couldn't help but put another spoonful into his mouth. The taste was so delicious that he couldn't stop. 800 copper coins. Why do I feel like that price is too low? Robert thought to himself as he felt a warm current flowing through his stomach. All of his doubts about the price had completely disappeared after tasting such delicious food. In fact, he even felt that it was reasonable for the price to be a little more expensive. After all, these were shiitake mushrooms that cost 100 gold coins. It's delicious. It's so delicious. Luther exclaimed as he put down the bag in his hand. His face was a little flushed from the rush of blood, and he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Robert was no longer in the mood to talk to him. He was stuffing mouthful after mouthful of braised chicken and rice into his mouth with a joyful expression on his face. Luther didn't say anything else. He picked up the tofu pudding and took a bite. He was instantly immersed in the delicious tofu pudding. The sweet flavor enveloped his entire body, and he was intoxicated. He had never thought that sugar could be so delicious. Give me another bowl of rice. Robert had unknowingly finished a bowl of rice, and there was still more than half of the braised chicken left. He turned to Yabamiya. Sure, one more bowl of rice. Yabamiya nodded. He was looking at Sally when he said the latter half of his sentence. Sally glanced at Robert and Luther, and nodded slightly to indicate that she would remember. She didn't want to make the same mistake as she did in the morning again. The two who had come with suspicions and wanted to expose Amy's fraud had completely forgotten their original intentions. They were completely intoxicated by the delicious food and couldn't extricate themselves. In that case, there shouldn't be any problems, right? Meg smiled as he looked at Robert and Luther's expressions of enjoyment. He felt an inexplicable sense of satisfaction. Then his eyes fell on the girl in a black veil sitting alone in the corner. As long as the restaurant was open, she would come early to line up, and then quietly sit in the corner and eat a bowl of tofu pudding and a bowl of Yangzhou fried rice. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of person was behind the veil. However, although the girl wore a veil that covered her entire head every day, he could see that the color and style of her clothes were becoming fresher and brighter. Meg felt that this was a good change and direction. Gloria suddenly felt as if someone was looking at her. She raised her head subconsciously. Her gaze passed through the crowd in the restaurant, and met Meg's eyes through the veil. He's looking at me. Gloria suddenly felt her heartbeat quicken. She felt an inexplicable sense of nervousness, but she quickly denied her own thoughts. Maybe he's just looking over here casually. There are so many customers, and he definitely won't look at someone who doesn't even dare to show her face. Meg withdrew his gaze and continued to cook. To him, many of the customers were very interesting. After all, it was the first time he had seen many races, so he didn't pay too much attention to them. He shouldn't be looking at me. Gloria heaved a sigh of relief, but for some reason, she felt a little disappointed. She lowered her head and continued to eat her tofu pudding. Chapter 278. Ha, what a cute little elf. She's calling me big sister. Cece looked at Amy happily before shaking her head, and saying, "No, I'm not an elf, nor a flower fairy. However, I might have been an elf 100 years ago." Lulu sat across from them and looked at Cece and Amy with a doting smile. 100 years ago. Wow, big sister is already over 100 years old. Amy looked at Cece in shock. But you look so young and beautiful. Really? No one has praised me like that for a long time. I thought I was already old. Cece smiled as she stroked Amy's hair, and said, "Little cutie, you have such a sweet mouth. What's your name?" "My name is Amy, and this is Ugly Duckling." Amy didn't resist Cece's touch. Instead, she felt that it was very warm and gentle, and she introduced Ugly Duckling as well. "Amy, what a nice name. It's as cute as you. You can call me Big Sister Cece. However, this little guy looks like a kitten. Why do you call it Ugly Duckling?" Cece asked Amy curiously. "Because it hatched from a duck egg, so it must be a duckling. However, it's too ugly, so I called it Ugly Duckling. However, although it's ugly now, it'll grow up and become a swan in spring. When that time comes. When that time comes." Amy explained seriously. However, she looked down at Ugly Duckling with a fervent look in her eyes toward the end. Her expression was similar to when she was looking at the delicious food in front of her. Meow, meow, Ugly Duckling was a little flustered for some reason. It felt that Amy's smile and gaze were hiding a great secret. What a cute little guy. Can I hug it? Cece looked at Amy with a smile. Ugly Duckling. Amy looked up and asked. No, you're cuter than it is. I want to hold little Amy. Cece shook her head and looked at Amy lovingly. All right, I'll let you hug me. Amy hesitated for 3 seconds. Looking at Cece, she quickly chose to nod. This young lady looked so gentle and kind. Amy really wanted to be hugged by her. Then I'll hug you. Cece gently picked up Amy, who was still holding Ugly Duckling in her arms, and placed her on her lap. She stroked Ugly Duckling's head with an envious expression, and said, "This little thing is also very cute. I'm so envious of Boss for having such a cute daughter." Ugly Duckling, which had always been cold and aloof to everyone, wasn't angry at all when Cece rubbed its head. Instead, a look of enjoyment appeared on its face, and it even took the initiative to rub its little head against her hand. "I think you should be envious of me. I have a super handsome father who can cook super delicious food. There's no one better than him in this world," Amy said with a serious expression. Cece nodded with an envious expression, and said, "Haha, you're right. I'm super envious of you. You can sit in a restaurant and eat delicious food every day when you wake up in bed. You must be super happy." Lulu couldn't help but clench her fists upon hearing Cece's words. She looked at Cece holding Amy in her arms and chatting happily with the two little ones in a soft voice. Her heart ached for them, but she swallowed the words that were about to come out of her mouth, and continued to look on in silence. "Here's your braised chicken and rice." At this moment, Yabamiya walked over with a plate of braised chicken and rice, and placed it gently in front of Cece. She looked at Amy in Cece's arms with a surprised expression. Amy wasn't clingy to anyone other than Meg. Amy obediently got down from Cece's lap, and looked at Cece with an earnest expression as she recommended the braised chicken and rice. "Big sister Cece, you should eat first. This braised chicken and rice is super delicious." "Yay, it's super delicious. And there's even a little moon in the rice. It's so cute." Cece's eyes lit up as she looked at the braised chicken in her bowl and the rice in front of her. It was as if she had seen something incredible, but she still didn't forget to thank Yabamiya. "Lulu, you should eat too," Cece said to Lulu. "It's fine, I want to watch you eat. I'll eat the rest after you're done." Lulu's eyes were filled with gentleness as she shook her head. "Lulu. Big Bear, why do you have such a cute name?" Amy looked at Lulu with a perplexed expression. "Ah, Big Bear, this nickname is so cute. Little Amy, you're the best." Cece smiled happily. She picked up a piece of chicken from the bowl and handed it to Lulu. "Have a piece first, Lulu," she said seriously. "If it's too good, you won't have anything to eat. You won't be able to eat that much." Lulu looked at the big bowl of braised chicken with a smile. She opened her mouth and took the piece of chicken. She chewed it a few times, and her eyes lit up. The delicious taste spread in her mouth. This was something she had never tasted before. Because Cece loved to eat, they had traveled to many places over the past 100 years. Every time they arrived at a place, they would stop and eat all the delicious food there before continuing on their journey. Because of this, they were often chased or ambushed. However, Cece loved to eat, so there was nothing they could do. However, despite having eaten so many delicacies from so many places, he had never tasted such a strong delicacy. The fragrant and tender mussels and the delicious chicken soup were on a completely different level from the so-called delicacies he had eaten in the past. It was a taste that made him want to praise. "Lulu, is it really that good?" Cece asked as she looked at Lulu with anticipation in her eyes. After all, Lulu had always been expressionless when he was eating, but now, his expression was completely lit up, and there was a look of enjoyment on his face that had never appeared before. "Yes, it's very good. Hurry up and eat." Lulu nodded with a smile and moved the bowl a little closer to Cece. "Lulu, why don't you eat with us?" Cece looked up at Lulu and said with a smile. "You eat first. I'll watch you eat." Lulu shook her head and reached out to touch Cece's head lovingly. "Eat. You'll like it. Then I'll dig in." Cece looked at the braised chicken in front of her, and her eyes lit up. She picked up a piece of chicken and put it into her mouth. The tender and delicious chicken tasted amazing. They often ate turkey in the mountains, but she had never thought that it could be so delicious. It completely overturned her impression of turkey. Then she picked up a piece of shiitake mushroom and bit into it gently. The delicious chicken soup instantly filled her mouth. The extremely delicious taste was intoxicating. Then she poured the chicken soup into the rice and put it into her mouth. The delicious chicken soup blended with the sweet moonlight rice. Chicken, shiitake mushroom, side dishes, and a big spoon of secret sauce. It was so delicious that she couldn't stop eating. It's so delicious. I think I can eat 10 more bowls. Cece looked at the rice that she had unknowingly finished and looked at Lulu excitedly. Chapter 279. Sure. Yabamiya nodded, but she was still a little hesitant as she asked, "It's just 10 bowls of rice. Are you sure you want that much? You still have a lot of dishes to serve." Lulu thought for a moment before nodding, and said, "Then we'll have 4 bowls of rice and a portion of braised chicken and rice. We'll add more if it's not enough." "Sure, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded as she turned and walked toward the kitchen. "It's really delicious, little Amy. I'm so envious of you for having such a great cook as your father. This is the most delicious food I've ever had." Cece's expression became even more radiant after eating a bowl of rice and half a portion of braised chicken and rice, and she looked at Amy with an excited expression. She had tried all kinds of delicious food, but she was still captivated by this braised chicken and rice. Compared to this, all the so-called delicious food she had eaten in the past was inferior to this dish. There was no comparison at all. "That's right, Father's cooking is the best in the world." Amy's little face was filled with pride. She was even happier when someone praised Meg than when they praised her. Cece still wanted to say something, but her expression suddenly froze, and she looked down at her lower abdomen in disbelief. She had felt a warm sensation in her lower abdomen when she was eating, and she had thought that it was just a normal reaction after eating the turkey. However, this warm sensation was becoming clearer and clearer, and it seemed to be healing the injuries she had sustained all those years ago. Cece formed a heart shape with her palms and gently placed them over her lower abdomen. She murmured a few gentle yet cryptic incantations, and a faint green light lit up from the heart shape, covering her lower abdomen. A withered little sapling about 10 centimeters tall slowly grew out of the heart shape. The branches and leaves were all withered, as if they were dead. However, the smallest leaf at the very top of the sapling now had a hint of tender green. Even though it was only half a leaf, it was still very conspicuous on such a withered little sapling. Is the world tree alive? Cece looked at the hint of tender green on the little sapling, and her expression was filled with shock and joy. Tears even welled up in the corners of her eyes. She looked at the little sapling between her hands as if she was looking at a child that she hadn't seen in a long time. It's really alive." Lulu abruptly rose to his feet. His hands trembled with excitement as he looked at the patch of green on the withered little tree between Cece's hands. He walked up to Cece and squatted down to look at the patch of green on the little tree. Both of them were overjoyed. "Lulu." Cece looked at Lulu, and she couldn't stop crying, and tears flowed down her face. "That's a good thing. With the world tree, we can revive the druids. You can also conceive again. As long as we're still around, we can have many babies and recreate this race." Lulu reached out and hugged Cece. He patted her back gently and allowed her to bury her face in his chest. His clothes were wet with her tears. "Cry. You'll be fine after you cry," Lulu whispered into Cece's ear. 100 years ago, they had experienced the extinction of their race. They carried the seed of the world tree with them, and relied on each other to survive. They had been hunted down on the Norland continent for close to 100 years, and had been in dire straits many times. 30 years ago, Cece was already pregnant, and they found a place to rest beside a lake in the mountains. They wanted to peacefully wait for the birth of a new life, but those detestable bastards suddenly appeared. Cece, who was pregnant, was no longer agile. Although they broke out of the encirclement in the end, Cece, who was shot in the stomach by a poisonous arrow, couldn't save the baby, and was severely injured. The world tree, which had just grown into a little sapling, injected all its source of life into Cece's body, and saved Cece from the brink of death. However, the world tree, which was the hope of the food tribe, withered. They had tried countless ways to revive it in the past few decades. They even risked a high price to buy a portion of the spring of life, but it still didn't show any signs of recovery. And because of this injury, Cece also lost her fertility. A girl who loved children so much, but lost the possibility of being a mother. How cruel was that? Although Lulu had been taking care of her carefully for the past few decades, he still felt very sorry for her every time he saw her looking at other people's children in a daze and playing with them happily like a mother. However, the world tree was showing signs of revival now. Once the world tree was revived, it could provide Cece with an endless supply of energy and recovery ability. The loss of fertility and the side effects that would flare up every once in a while would no longer be a problem. Hope and light fell on the two of them again. They seemed to have found their destination after running around aimlessly for 100 years in order to survive. He could understand Cece's feelings the most because the same feelings were surging in his heart. However, he was a man, and should be her support at a time like this. Amy stood at the side with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She looked at the two of them who suddenly hugged each other and cried with a puzzled look on her face. However, she didn't rush to ask any questions after seeing the atmosphere. She just stood quietly at the side with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Meanwhile, the customers at the side were also dumbfounded when they saw the two of them crying tears of joy. They didn't know why the girl suddenly cried. Wasn't she very happy when she was eating just now? Could it be that she cried because of the delicious food? Looks like this girl has a very high place in her heart when it comes to food, a customer at the side guessed softly. A middle-aged man at the side wiped the corners of his eyes and sighed with emotion. Yes, I didn't think so at first, but seeing this girl cry, I think that almost half of my life has passed, and I've only just tasted Mr. Mac's food. It's such a sad thing. I can't help but cry. Father, don't be sad. You're already so old, it's embarrassing. His son, who was around 17 or 18 years old, silently picked up his bowl and turned his face away with a disdainful expression. The middle-aged man slammed his chopsticks onto the table with an enraged expression, and said, "You little brat, how dare you call me an embarrassment? Are you too arrogant, or am I too weak to hold a whip? I was wrong. Eat your food, and we can talk outside. I don't want to be blacklisted by the restaurant just because you whipped me." The son immediately gave in. That's more like it. The middle-aged man also took a glance at Amy, who wasn't paying any attention to them, before picking up his chopsticks again and nodding before continuing to eat his braised chicken. Cece didn't bawl her eyes out. She was only sobbing slightly, and she was being held gently in Lulu's arms, so it didn't affect the customers at all. They all looked at each other before continuing to eat. Chapter 280. Sure, go ahead. You can have as many servings as you want, as long as you can. Lulu nodded with a smile. He reached out to wipe away the tears on her face with a doting look in his eyes. But if I keep eating, won't I become very fat? Won't you abandon me then? Cece asked as she looked at Lulu worriedly. Lulu patted Cece's head with a smile, and said, "Silly girl, you lived in my heart when you were so skinny. Now that you're fat, you'll be stuck in my heart and won't be able to leave. Hee hee, Lulu, you're so nice. Cece immediately broke into laughter. A blissful smile appeared on her face. "Ah, I'm so envious of this kind of love. If a man said that to me, I'd definitely marry him." A chubby girl at a nearby table cupped her face in her hands with an envious expression. "Then you'll have to move into his heart first. Otherwise, you'll be stuck outside," her mother, who was sitting across from her, said calmly as she glanced at her. "Mom, if you talk like that, I'll lose my temper." The girl was instantly dejected as she looked at her mother with puffed cheeks. "If you're angry, then so be it. If you can't finish it, you can give me this tofu pudding. Your father has been saying that my skin has become more tender and beautiful these days." The woman wasn't flustered at all as she looked at the sweet tofu pudding in front of the girl. "No. I want to eat some delicious sweet tofu pudding to calm my sorrowful heart." The girl hurriedly reached out to protect her tofu pudding. Then, she picked up her spoon and began to eat with a serious expression. The more she ate, the happier she became. "Big Bear, you liar. Your heart is so small. How can Big Sister Cece live in it?" Amy looked at Lulu with a righteous expression. Lulu looked at Amy, who had a serious expression on her face, and didn't know how to explain herself. "Sister Cece, I heard from the aunties that men who lie are unreliable. Bear looks honest, but he's lying to you." Amy then looked at Cece and said earnestly, "Also, Sister Cece looks the best right now. If you put on weight, you won't look so good anymore. A woman shouldn't trust a man. You have to be the best you can to ensure that you can still live well without a man. Only then will a man know how to cherish you." This is what the aunties said. When the guests heard Amy admonishing the young lady like a little adult, they all smiled kindly. At the same time, they expressed their approval of Amy's behavior. After all, this young couple was always showing off their love for each other. Although it was sweet, but watching them from the sidelines felt a little uncomfortable. They wanted to say something, but they didn't know what to say. Amy's words made everyone say what they wanted to say quickly. She said it in the tone of a child, and while expressing their opinions, it didn't have any negative impact on the lovey-dovey couple. "That's right. You shouldn't eat too much and get too fat. Otherwise, you won't be able to wear beautiful dresses in the future." Cece still had a smile on her face, but she also nodded. She reached out to touch Amy's hair and said with a smile, "Little Amy knows so much. I heard it from the aunties." Amy nodded happily and said with a happy smile on her face, "Well, you have to believe the words of the aunties." Cece nodded. She looked up at Lulu and said, "Lulu, you have to treat me better in the future. Don't change. Well, you are my everything in this world." Lulu nodded seriously with a sincere expression. "Big Bear, you've changed." Amy looked up at Lulu and pointed at the bamboo box at his feet. "Look, you still have this box. I saw you carry it in." Lulu opened his mouth. He glanced at the box at his feet and didn't know what to say. "Well, it tastes better now." The customers nodded with satisfaction and enjoyed the food even more. "Ha ha ha." Cece was convulsing with laughter. She seemed to be in a good mood. "Hee hee." An honest smile appeared on Lulu's face at the sight of Cece's joyful expression. He scratched his head and sat down again. He didn't dare to say anything else, but as long as Cece was happy, nothing else mattered. These two are interesting people. But Tree of World sounds a little familiar. Could it be that these two are druids? Mag thought to himself as he turned to look at Lulu and Cece with an intrigued expression. Meg didn't have any memories about druids in Alex's memory. However, Meg got a tattered history of the Norland continent from a bookstore in the Aden Square a few days ago. He didn't know who wrote it, but the bookstore owner said it was a relic from almost 100 years ago. After some bargaining, he bought it for 1 gold coin. He read it like a storybook when he was free these days, and had a rough understanding of the chaotic Norland continent. The history was very rough, and only a few words about druids were mentioned. The general idea was that druids were a branch of the elven race, but they called themselves night elves. They didn't regard the wind forest as their holy land, nor did they believe in the tree of life. Instead, they had their own holy tree, the Tree of World. During the extremely chaotic racial war 100 years ago, the druids were powerful, but their holy land was breached in the end. The Tree of World, which was thousands of meters tall, was toppled, and the druids were wiped out. There were no more druids in the world. Countless races on the Norland continent had been wiped out during the war, and the druids were only one of them. Although the record was simple, the author speculated that the elves were behind the destruction of the druids. After all, druids had always been regarded as heretics by the elves. Of course, Meg didn't know the exact reason, but if these two were really druids who had survived 100 years ago, then they were a rare race. They were probably the only druids left on the Norland continent. Yabamiya placed the bowls of rice and braised chicken on the table, and asked, "Here are your 4 bowls of rice and 1 braised chicken. Do you want the rest of the dishes to be served later or now?" Lulu looked at Cece, who was about to dig in with a bowl of rice, and said with a smile, "Let's wait until we're done eating." "Okay." Yabamiya nodded, and walked to the next customer. "Take your time, big sister Cece." Amy smiled, and walked to the next customer with Ugly Duckling in her arms. When she was busy, Amy would help Sally with the bill to share some of her work. Chapter 281. The warmth nourished the world tree in her body. Cece could clearly feel the connection that had been severed for 30 years being re-established. Even though it was very weak and fragile, as if it would die in an instant, it was as if a little life was being reborn in her body. It reminded her of the child in her womb all those years ago, and she felt a trace of happiness in her heart. The world tree had been born in her body all those years ago. It had accompanied her for decades like a child. Later on, when she was severely injured and on the verge of death, it was the world tree that had taken the initiative to transfer all of its source of life into her body and saved her life. Now, this child had come back to life. To her, this was a very special feeling. The gap in the depths of her heart was also slowly healing as the world tree recovered. Lulu sat across from her and watched quietly. She picked up her chopsticks and put food in Cece's bowl from time to time. When she finished eating, she would give her a bowl of rice. However, she didn't eat anything herself. "Lulu, you should eat too. There's a lot of rice anyway," Cece said to Lulu with her mouth full. "It's okay. You eat first. I'm not hungry. Eat more. It's good for your body." Lulu shook her head with a smile. She looked toward the kitchen and watched Meg's busy figure. She sighed with emotion. This owner is really amazing. He can make such a delicious dish with such miraculous effects. If the world tree can grow by eating braised chicken and rice, then when we have children in the future, we can bring them here to eat braised chicken and rice every day. Their cultivation and growth speed will definitely increase a lot. Yeah, it's so delicious. And I feel warm all over after eating it. It's super comfortable. I think I can eat 10 more bowls. Cece swallowed the rice in her mouth and said happily. Then, she lowered her head and continued to eat happily. Lulu looked at the smile on Cece's face. She turned around and looked out of the restaurant with vigilance and worry. Those guys. She didn't know when they would show up. Burp, Robert and Luther burped at the same time. They looked at the bowl in front of them, which looked as if it had been licked clean. Then, they looked up at each other with an awkward expression. My lord, this sweet tofu pudding is so delicious. It's on the same level as Ruggiemo. I think these two dishes can be ranked first and second on the list. I can't stop eating them. 200 copper coins, 300 copper coins, it's so worth it. All the guesses and suspicions he had before entering the restaurant had already been tossed to the back of his mind. However, his expression was somewhat awkward. After all, it took courage to slap yourself in the face. However, as a man of integrity, after tasting the delicious Ruggiemo and tofu pudding, Luther couldn't go against his conscience and say that they weren't delicious. That was even more disgusting than slapping himself in the face. Robert shook his head, and said, I agree with your evaluation of Ruggiemo. However, I think the savory tofu pudding and braised chicken and rice are more suitable. Tofu pudding is such a delicate and soft delicacy, so of course it has to be savory. My lord, that's because you haven't tasted this sweet tofu pudding before. If this tofu pudding was salty, I don't dare to imagine what kind of strange taste it would have. Luther didn't back down in the slightest this time. Instead, he argued with reason. You're wrong to say that. The tofu pudding itself has the fragrance and sweetness of soybeans. With the refreshing sauce, the chopped pickled mustard greens, and the tiny prawns, it's delicious. It's an absolute delicacy. Robert shook his head. However, he was a leader, after all, and naturally couldn't argue with Luther in the restaurant. He raised his hand with a smile, and said, All right, you eat your sweet tofu pudding, and I'll eat my savory tofu pudding. Don't argue in the restaurant. Luther wasn't someone who didn't know when to back down, and he immediately backed down after hearing Robert's words. However, it appeared that he still wasn't going to back down just because of Robert's status. Waiter, the bill for two, Robert said. That's 1 braised chicken and rice, 2 tofu pudding, and 1 Ruggiemo. That's a total of 1,550 copper coins. Amy made her way over with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She counted the bowls on the table, and extended her little hand toward Robert in a baby voice. All right. Robert looked at Amy with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He pulled out a dragon coin, 5 gold coins, and 5 coins from his wallet, and placed them in her little hand. He didn't think that not only did this little girl know how to eat, but she was also very good at math at such a young age. She was able to calculate the price in such a short time. Even the average adult wouldn't be as fast as her. Amy nodded. She put Ugly Duckling down on the ground, and walked over to the counter with the money in her hands. 10 coins was a lot for her. Just as Robert was about to stand up, he flipped through the menu beside him. He suddenly discovered that there were many words written on the back of the menu, and an intrigued look appeared on his face. There were a series of rules listed on the back of the menu. 1. Loud noises are strictly prohibited in the restaurant. 2. Cash is strictly prohibited in the restaurant. Credit is strictly prohibited. 3. Fighting and threatening the owner and employees are strictly prohibited in the restaurant. Violators of this rule will be blacklisted and banned from the restaurant forever. All of the rules were written on the back of the menu in gilded handwriting, and his eyes lit up at the sight of them. It wasn't rare for restaurants to have rules, but most of the restaurants in the Eden Square had rules that prohibited certain races from entering or taking out alcohol. This was the first time that Robert had seen a restaurant like Amy's that had such strict rules for its customers. A restaurant owner who dares to use half-race waitresses, a restaurant that dares to set its own requirements for its customers, and a chef who can cook extremely tasteless food that has body conditioning effects. A restaurant like this should rank at the top of the Eden Square food competition rankings. Robert put down the menu in his hand and looked at Meg, who was busy in the kitchen. He stood up and walked out of the door. After exiting the restaurant, he stopped and turned back to look at Amy's with a faint smile on his face, and said, "Luther, wouldn't it be very interesting if a restaurant that doesn't belong to the Aden Chamber of Commerce one day occupies the top 5 spots on the Aden Square food competition rankings?" Luther also looked at Amy's signboard with a serious expression, and said, "If such delicious food can't even rank in the top 5, then I feel like our Aden Square food competition rankings have lost all credibility." That's right. The most important thing for customers to choose a restaurant based on the Aden Square food competition rankings is credibility, and we're losing that right now. Robert nodded with a serious expression. He withdrew his gaze from the restaurant, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he said, "But things are different now. Amy's has appeared out of nowhere, and perhaps it's a way to break the impasse. Customers have sharp eyes, and if angry customers vote with their feet, perhaps the association will have to undergo a new round of reforms. A war with the Aden Chamber of Commerce might be a sharp knife." Chapter 282. After finishing 2 servings of braised chicken and rice and 6 bowls of rice, Cece placed the earthenware bowl she had licked clean on the table and burped contentedly. She rubbed her round belly and leaned her head back in her chair. She looked at Lulu and smiled happily. "This is so good, Lulu. This is the first time in my life that I've eaten something so delicious. It's the first time I've had such a good meal." The guests at the table who were about to leave looked at the pile of bowls in front of Cece with a strange expression. This girl looked small and thin, but she was also a big eater. How could she eat so much by herself? "Then we'll come again." Lulu nodded with a smile. She looked very happy too. "But you haven't eaten yet." Cece suddenly thought of something. She said to Yabamiya, who had just walked up to her, "Can you bring the rest of the dishes to us?" "Sure, please wait a moment." Yabamiya nodded with a smile. He put away the bowls on the table and walked to the kitchen. Although he was also surprised by Cece's appetite, he didn't show it on his face. Instead, he was a little envious of such a spoiled love. It was so reassuring. The rest of the Yangzhou fried rice, rujiamo, and 2 servings of sweet tofu pudding were soon served. The tantalizing aroma wafted over. Cece looked at the new dishes on the table, and her eyes gradually lit up. However, she was so full that even moving her body was a burden. She pouted and said pitifully, "Lulu, I want to have a bite of that rainbow-colored rice." "Okay, then have a bite." Lulu scooped up a spoonful of rice and put it into her mouth. "Oh, it's delicious, Anne." Cece's words stopped abruptly. She was a little incredulous, and a little wary. She chewed a few times, and enjoyed the faint fragrance that seeped out from the rice. It tasted a little similar to the spring of life that she had drunk many years ago. After swallowing, her body felt slightly nourished. Although the effect wasn't very obvious, it was very similar to the feeling brought about by the spring of life. In other words, when the owner made this dish, it was very likely that he added a little bit of the spring of life. However, the spring of life was the holy spring of the elven race. Even among the elven race, only the royal family and the noblest families had access to it. How did he get it? Could it be that he was related to the elves? What's wrong? Lou immediately noticed the change in Cece's expression and asked. Nothing. It's too good. But I'm really full. You can finish it all. A smile reappeared on Cece's face as she shook her head. However, her gaze soon fell on the bowl of sweet tofu pudding, and an eager expression appeared on her face. She picked up her spoon and said, "But I think I can finish this sweet tofu pudding." "Eat slowly. Don't overeat." Lulu said with a smile. He picked up his spoon and began to eat the Yangzhou fried rice. It tasted different from the braised chicken, but it was just as delicious. After watching Cece eat for a long time, his stomach was growling with hunger, and he couldn't stop eating. The sweet tofu pudding is super delicious. Cece scooped up a spoonful of the tofu pudding, and her eyes lit up. Although she was full, she sat up straight again and began to focus on the tofu pudding in front of her. It was the busiest time for the restaurant. One customer after another placed their orders and left after paying the bill. When they walked out, they all had joyful smiles on their faces and tickets in their hands. Apart from the sweet and savory fans who gave 1 star to each other, the rest of the customers all gave 5 stars. Robert and Luther returned to the vote-counting booth. The Catering Association staff members who were responsible for counting the votes had also just returned from the restaurant across the street. They were about to continue counting the votes. Vice President, Luther, you're back. Did that restaurant hire a lot of people to fake the results? We had the Drew's roast lamb chop, which is ranked 68th on the rankings this afternoon, Alvin hurriedly asked as he looked at the 2 people walking over. Yeah, if the Vice President can verify this, then we can remove this restaurant from the rankings. Everyone was also looking forward to the results. Although they knew that the Aiden Square food competition wasn't fair, they couldn't tolerate a restaurant that disregarded the rules and disrupted the order. 1 Reggiano and 1 sweet tofu pudding, both 5 stars. Luther waved the tickets that the Alvin waitress had given him before they left and handed them to Alvin. Ha! Alvin faltered slightly at the sight of the tickets in his hand. Holy fuck, Luther, you weren't bought off by that restaurant owner, were you? You're completely wrong. Luther shook his head. He wasn't angry at all. Instead, he turned to Robert, who still hadn't said anything. 1 braised chicken and rice, 1 savory tofu pudding, both 5 stars. Robert handed over the tickets in his hand. Ha! Everyone's expressions changed in unison. If Luther had been bought off, they would have been a little skeptical. However, no one would believe that Vice President Robert had been bought off. He was the Vice President of the Catering Association, yet he had been stripped of all his power and authority. He had even personally come here to check the tickets and inspect the restaurants that might have had problems. All of this was because he couldn't stand the current state of the Catering Association. He couldn't be bought over. As members of the Catering Association, they were naturally well aware of this. However, Robert's current attitude had already explained everything. There were no issues with the tickets for this restaurant, and the 5-star reviews for both dishes were simply inconceivable to the strict Robert. Luther and I have already visited that restaurant. Business is booming, and there's no obvious reason for this. At the same time, we've ordered and tasted the dishes in person. The dishes are completely different from those of other restaurants. They're subversive, comfortable, and excellent service, all of which are worthy of a 5-star review. Furthermore, customers have high spending power, so they're more willing to accept this price, so there are no issues with the tickets at all. Robert looked at everyone with a serious expression. Seeing as the Vice President has said that, it looks like this restaurant really is a dark horse in this Aiden Square food competition. A worker nodded with a smile. He was also quite expectant as he asked, but I'm a little curious. Just what kind of food is it that the Vice President gave a 5-star review for? It's naturally very delicious. It can't be described with words. If you have time, go and try it yourself. I highly recommend the sweet tofu pudding, Luther said with a sincere expression. I think the savory tofu pudding is more delicious, Robert said before turning to leave. My God, what did I just hear? Vice President Robert, who has always been an upright and honest man, recommended the savory tofu pudding, a young worker exclaimed after a brief silence. Everyone looked at Robert's departing figure with incredulity on their faces. This was something that had never happened before. 6 men dressed as hunters were leading their horses as they scanned their surroundings with alert expressions, as if they were looking for something. "Auntie, where can I find the best food in the Aden Square?" The youngest hunter among them asked as he stopped a woman who appeared to be in her 30s. "You're the auntie. Your whole family is auntie. I'm still a virgin." The woman rolled her eyes with a disdainful expression. She turned around and stomped on the young hunter's foot before storming off in a huff. "That bitch." The young hunter raised his arm to reveal the arrow in his sleeve, which he aimed at the woman's back. Chapter 283. Are you full? Lulu put down the spoon in his hand. The food in front of him was already gone, and he smiled at Cece, who was licking her bowl of tofu pudding. I'm so full. I'm super satisfied," Cece said happily as she put down the bowl with a trace of orange syrup hanging from the corner of her mouth. Lulu reached out to wipe the syrup from the corner of her mouth. "Wait." Cece suddenly reached out to stop him. She licked the syrup from the corner of her mouth, and said with a smug expression, "Lulu, you're not allowed to eat my syrup. If you like it, I'll order 2 servings for you next time." Lulu withdrew his hand with a smile. "That won't do. We have to follow the boss's rules. Each person can only order 1 serving, which means that each person can only eat 1 serving. How can I be the only one eating 2 servings? We can't be blacklisted." Cece shook her head with a serious expression. We have to follow the rules." A serious expression also appeared on Lulu's face. The braised chicken, which could resurrect the world tree, was like a ray of light in the darkness to them. It reignited their faith and hope, so they were also very respectful toward Meg, who had cooked up such a delicious dish. "Here's the bill," Lulu said. "Big Bear, the total is 25 gold coins." Amy walked over and thought for a moment before extending her hands toward Lulu. Wow, little Amy is so smart. She calculated it so quickly. If it were me, it would take me a long time to calculate it. Cece looked at Amy with admiration. Not only was this little girl adorable, she was also very interesting and super smart. She was a very likable child. "Father taught me all of this." Amy looked at Cece proudly. She then looked at Cece curiously, and asked, "Big sister Cece, are you coming back tonight?" "Of course, but I ate so much for lunch, so I'll probably come back later tonight to try all of the delicious food." Cece nodded with a sincere and serious expression. "Okay." Amy nodded happily. Even though it was her first time meeting Cece, she felt that this big sister was very kind and good at eating. She was able to finish 2 servings of braised chicken, 6 bowls of rice, and a sweet tofu pudding all by herself. Amy was very impressed. 25 gold coins. Lulu carefully placed 25 gold coins in Amy's hands, and they formed a small mountain. Even though she had been scolded by Amy many times today, she still looked at Amy with a kind smile on her face. Because of this little girl and the boss, Cece was smiling a lot more today, and she even gave them hope. "Goodbye, little Amy, and ugly duckling." Cece patted Amy's head, and then pinched Ugly Duckling's face. "Goodbye, big sister Cece," Amy also said politely as she watched the 2 of them walk out the door. Druids are very close to nature, so they're more approachable to children and animals. Meg wondered to himself as he watched the 2 of them walk out hand in hand. He was quite interested in this pair of druids, who were very likely to be the last surviving druids. "Lulu, what are these tickets for?" Cece asked Lulu as she looked at the 2 tickets in her hand. "That elf said they're for voting." Lulu turned his head to look at Sally, who was busy settling the bill for the customers in the restaurant, and a hint of hostility appeared in his eyes. She's still a child, so she probably doesn't know what happened back then. Besides, she's a very powerful magic caster, so we might not be able to defeat her. Cece shook her head slightly as she held Lulu's hand. Then, she walked forward while holding his hand, and said softly, "But I'm afraid this boss is very close to the elves. He has a half-elf daughter, which means the mother of the child is an elf. And I tasted the spring of life in the Yangzhou fried rice." Spring of life. Lulu's expression changed slightly upon hearing that. Cece nodded. Yes. We bought a portion of the spring of life 25 years ago. I still remember the taste. I'm 100% sure that's the taste of the spring of life. In that case, we have to be careful with what we say in the future. It's been over 100 years, and people should have forgotten that there used to be a race called Druids on the Norland continent. But now, the elves are so powerful, and those vicious dogs are chasing after us. If our identities are exposed, I'm afraid we'll have to leave Chaos City again. Lulu's expression became very serious. They had just seen the light of hope. How could they be willing to leave just like that? Cece suddenly reached out to hold Lulu's hand, and looked at the center of the Aiden Square. Then let's not go to vote. I have a bad feeling about this. Lulu nodded. Okay, then we won't go. She looked around, and then held Cece's hand, and walked straight to the center of the square. Lulu, I don't think that owner is a bad person. A bad person wouldn't be able to raise such a cute and sensible child. Yes, but we still have to be careful. The owner must be powerful and powerful to be able to make a high-tier elven magic caster work as a waitress in his restaurant. That's right, but if you can eat and drink for free, no one can resist the temptation of such delicious food, right? Maybe she's just here for the food. A high-tier magic caster working as a waitress in a restaurant just for food? Yes. She's a pretty little girl. If she can eat good food with her own ability, why would she go around doing mercenary missions like a man? Look at how elegant and noble she is working as a waitress. She's not demeaning at all. The two of them walked further and further into the Aiden Square. Under the cover of all the statues and trees, no one noticed them. Boss, there are so many restaurants here. Which one should we start looking for? Most of the 6 hunters were standing in front of a few rows of magic screens. They looked up at the densely packed names of the restaurants with troubled expressions on their faces. If this is a ranking, then we should start looking from the first restaurant. The bearded man pointed to the first dish on the first magic screen, Dukas Restaurant's roast lamb. Boss, you're so wise. They must be looking for restaurants based on this ranking. As long as we look from restaurant to restaurant, we'll definitely find them. Everyone chimed in. Chapter 284. Which direction do you smell, Blackie? Anthem looked at the middle-aged hunter and asked excitedly. The other hunters also looked at him expectantly. Here, here, and here, all of them. The hunter called Hazy pointed to the left, then to the right, and finally to the inside of the square, and said seriously. Nonsense, then you might as well say that they are in the sky. Anthem slapped him on the head, somewhat annoyed. Boss, they're everywhere. According to the residual smell, it shouldn't have been here for too long. That means they're probably still around, Blackie said, feeling aggrieved. Anthem nodded and said, that's right. One of you will memorize this list, and we'll search for them one by one. This. Everyone's face suddenly revealed a difficult expression. Asking them to remember these things was simply too difficult. Boss, this seems to be the top 100 restaurants on the list. It's the same order as the one above. We can follow this order and search for them one by one. I think it's very likely that they also eat according to this order. At this time, the youngest hunter took out a piece of golden red paper from the ballot box beside him. On it was a list of restaurants, and the addresses were marked in detail at the back. "All right, then we'll search according to this list. Keep your eyes open." Anthem nodded. He waved his hand, and walked toward the first Dukas restaurant. "Captain, those guys look a little suspicious," Monkey whispered to Barzil as he watched the hunters walking quickly with their horses. "Yes. That guy wanted to kill a woman." Barzil's expression was also a little serious. He instinctively felt a hint of bloodthirsty threat from those guys, which would only happen to people who lived on the edge of blades all year round. And those guys were definitely not weak, especially that bearded man. He was probably more powerful than Barzil. He should have just arrived in Chaos City. Those who came to Chaos City for the first time were the targets of the Grey Temple because the order in Chaos City was different from that of the Norland continent. Even in a city like Rodu, which was known for its good order, the crime rate was more than 10 times that of Chaos City. Murder was nothing out of the ordinary. However, it was different in Chaos City. As long as you violated the rules of Chaos City, no matter who you were, Chaos City would not ignore you. Those guys had the intention to kill someone on the street. This was a dangerous signal. They had to be vigilant. "Monkey, go to Mamie's and wait for Master Brandley to come out. Report this to him. Although they haven't done anything out of line yet, they're enough to be listed as dangerous targets. We have to monitor them," Barzil said seriously. "Yes." Monkey nodded before running toward Mamie restaurant. If they were dangerous targets, it meant that they were at least 5th tier in power, and they were highly unstable. It was no small matter that such targets had appeared in the Aiden Square, which was a crowded place. "Mr. Mac, remember to come and pick up Amy early tonight," Crassus said to Meg after paying the bill. "Okay." Meg nodded. Crassus had told him in the morning that he couldn't send Amy back. "Goodbye, Master Halfbeard." Amy waved at Crassus. "Goodbye, little Amy." Crassus nodded with a smile, and left the restaurant. The lunchtime passed in a hectic manner. After sending off the last customer, Meg turned to Sally with a smile, and asked, "How many tickets were sent out this afternoon?" 380 tickets were sent out this afternoon. Sally counted the remaining tickets in her hand. Her expression was calm, but there was a hint of excitement in her eyes. After all, these tickets were sent out by her, and would determine whether the restaurant's food would be able to make it onto the Aiden Square Food Competition Rankings board. Sure enough, 2,000 tickets aren't enough. "I think we'll be able to send out more than half of them today." Meg nodded without much surprise. The lunchtime was half an hour longer than in the morning, so there would be more customers, and there would be even more customers at night. "Boss, I think all of your food should be in the top 10. "There's nothing better than your food," Yabamiya said sincerely to Meg. "It's not easy to make it to the top 10. Meg shook his head with a smile. The flow of customers in the Aiden Square was even more exaggerated than in Chengdu's Chuanxi Road during the holidays. The restaurants that could make it to the top 10 were all quite large, so it wouldn't be difficult for them to send out thousands of tickets in a single day. Furthermore, some of the dishes in these high-end restaurants were even more expensive than Amy's, so it wouldn't be easy for them to make it to the top 10. However, Meg wasn't too concerned about this. After all, the system's mission was to get a dish into the top 30. According to his current progress, he should be able to complete that. Meg had a feeling that the system would give him more missions related to the Aiden Square food competition in the future, so he had to control his ranking. If he made it to the top of the food competition rankings board on his first try, the system might just give him a mission to get the number 1 spot. "I think Father's food should be in the top 10. It's so delicious," Amy said with a serious expression as she looked at Meg. "It will be one day." Meg patted Amy's head with a smile before picking her up in his arms, and saying, "All right, go and take a nap. I'll take you to class." "All right." Amy lay down obediently on Meg's shoulder before closing her eyes. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling scratched Meg's trouser leg with a pitiable expression, fearing that it would be abandoned by Meg. "Then you can go to sleep as well." Meg crouched down to scoop up Ugly Duckling before turning to Sally and Yabamia with a smile as he said, "Then I'll leave the rest to you. If you're tired, you can rest for a while before you work again." "All right." Sally and Yabamia nodded in unison before looking on as Meg made his way upstairs. "Aisha, you did even better in the afternoon. You're improving so quickly." Yabamia turned to Sally with a smile before giving her a thumbs up. "You did much better than me." "I still have to study," Aisha replied modestly, but there was still a hint of elation in her eyes. When Meg came downstairs with Amy, the restaurant had already been refurbished. Sally had already left, and Yabamia was sleeping on the table. "Shoo, let me asleep for a while. We'll be quiet when we go out." "She's working very hard," Meg said in a soft voice before heading out with Amy on his bicycle. Amy nodded obediently before giving Ugly Duckling a warning glance so that it wouldn't wake Sally up. Meg rode the bicycle toward Chaos School with Amy. It was already past lunchtime, so there were fewer people on the road. As such, they were able to pass through the school without any issues, but there were a lot of people who turned to look at them. Chapter 285. Elizabeth's gaze followed Meg and Amy as they disappeared around the bend. The father and daughter pair gave her a strange feeling. They clearly looked like ordinary people, but for some reason, they gave her a sense of familiarity and danger. "Elizabeth, what are you thinking about?" At this moment, a middle-aged man, who was also wearing a snow-white robe that looked like it was carved out of frost, pushed open the door, and asked Elizabeth with a smile as she stood by the window. "Nothing, just two passers-by." Elizabeth retracted her gaze and looked back at the man with anticipation. "Uncle, you said you found something left behind by Father. Is that true? After the battle with Alex, he went missing for so many years, and there has been no news of him. I accidentally found it at an auction, and I can confirm that it belongs to Big Brother. However, there is a bloodline seal inside, and only you can open it. That's why I sent you a message." The man nodded and stretched out his right hand, and a small ice blue box appeared in his hand. Then, he flew it toward Elizabeth out of thin air. A hint of excitement appeared on Elizabeth's cold face. Her hands trembled slightly as she caught the small box. She took a deep breath and gently opened the lid. In the middle of the box, there was a ring inlaid with a round sapphire jade. "This is Father's ring," Elizabeth exclaimed softly. She picked up the ring, and her face was full of excitement. However, a nervous expression soon appeared on her face. "This is Father's favorite space ring, and he always carries it with him. If nothing happened, there's no way he would have lost it. Where did you get this ring?" "A mercenary picked it up in the wilderness. It was sold at an auction as an ordinary gemstone ring. I just happened to be at the auction with a friend, and I felt Big Brother's aura, so I bought it. Perhaps there are clues to Big Brother's disappearance inside. Open it and take a look." The man nodded slightly, and his expression was also a little serious. "All right." Elizabeth nodded, and an ice needle appeared out of thin air. She gently pricked her fingertip, and a drop of bluish-silver blood dripped onto the sapphire. It was instantly absorbed, and a ray of light rose from the ring. A mirror image of a middle-aged man with snow-white hair appeared. He looked at Elizabeth with a smile, and said, "Elizabeth, you're probably the only one who can find this ring. The others probably can't wait for me to die." "Father." Elizabeth looked at the man in slightly dirty clothes. The former king of the frost dragons, Rankster, had even left his space ring in the wilderness. What happened to him? It's very complicated, so I don't want to say too much. However, you can rest assured that I'm not dead yet. I threw the ring away on purpose. You just need to know that there's nothing in the ring, so you don't have to worry too much. No one will do anything to you for an empty ring, except for a fool, Rankster said casually with a hint of mockery. The image flashed, and the projection disappeared. The ring returned to its original appearance. Father. Elizabeth reached out her hand in a daze, but she couldn't grab anything. She lowered her hand in disappointment. Elizabeth, quickly check if there's anything in the ring, Fox said to Elizabeth with a nervous expression. It's empty. Elizabeth looked at the ring, and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes. However, she didn't show it. Instead, she put the ring back into the box with a disappointed expression. It's empty. Fox was also disappointed. He looked at the ring in Elizabeth's hand, and withdrew his gaze. Elizabeth wasn't good at hiding her emotions. He could tell from her expression that there was something in the ring. Uncle, can I take this ring as a souvenir? Elizabeth looked up at Fox with a sorrowful expression. Of course. This is something your father left behind. You can keep it. Fox quickly regained his composure. He nodded and said, I have something to do outside the city. It's rare for you to come to Chaos City. Stay for a few more days before you leave. Elizabeth nodded. She kept the little box in her hand, and watched as a bluish-silver light appeared under Fox's feet. He disappeared from the room in the blink of an eye. Chapter 286. The box slowly opened, revealing the ring inside. Elizabeth waved her hand gently, and a frost barrier appeared in the room, enveloping the entire room. This was one of the innate abilities of frost dragons. Apart from being able to seal off the probing of others, her own strength would also be enhanced within this barrier. After making sure that even if Fox turned around, he wouldn't be able to silently investigate her actions, Elizabeth picked up the ring in the box. From her father's words and Fox's change in attitude, Elizabeth could already see that something was fishy. Fox was most likely not really concerned about her father's whereabouts, but rather wanted to obtain something. Elizabeth walked to the side of the table, holding the ring in her hand. She gently brushed the surface of the table, and a letter and two palm-sized boxes, one gold and one silver, appeared on the table. Along with it was a long white piece of paper, with some scribbled black handwriting on it. Child, show a disappointed expression and say there's nothing inside. This was the real reason why Elizabeth had decided to hide it from Fox. When she said there was nothing in the ring, she saw a trace of cold light disperse from Fox's fingertips. Fox had the strength of a grade 9 powerhouse. If he wanted to make a move on her, she would have no way of retaliating. She wouldn't even be able to break his frost barrier. In her memory, this youngest uncle of hers had doted on her in every possible way since she was young. He was one of the closest family members apart from her father. But today, he actually wanted to make a move on her because of a relic left behind by her father. What was the truth behind her father's disappearance? What did he leave behind that made Fox want to make a move on her? Looking at the two gem-studded boxes, Elizabeth reached out to pick up the letter at the side. It felt like a piece of hard ice in her hands. The silver-white envelope flashed with silver light, enveloping Elizabeth's entire body. Then, it instantly withdrew into the envelope, and a layer of frost floated from the envelope to the ground, revealing the real envelope. Dear Elizabeth, my daughter, I'm very happy that you can read this letter. Forgive me for leaving without saying goodbye. Elizabeth opened the letter, and looked at the familiar scribbled handwriting on it. Her eyes gradually reddened. After finding this letter, you don't have to look for me anymore, because I'm also looking for someone. It's obviously a stupid and time-consuming thing for you to follow me. I, Rankster's daughter, should stand at the top of the dragon race. The rumors about my disappearance were mostly about me being defeated by Alex and dying from severe injuries, right? Actually, that's not the case. Other than that important matter, I left this time to find Alex. I don't think he's dead. Also, I have something to tell you. 17 years ago, in Chaos City, I fell in love with a human woman named Jillian. However, I had to leave Chaos City because of some matters in my race. When I left, she was already pregnant with my child. According to my calculations, she should be 14 years old now. If I'm not wrong, she should have awakened my golden bloodline, the golden dragon bloodline from your grandmother. I'm very sorry to say this to you. Your mother's death was a huge blow to me, and I found peace and comfort in Jillian. However, I didn't want her and her mother to be involved in the dragon race's disputes, so I never visited them. I've always been very sorry. Here are 2 dragon origins. They're the coming-of-age ceremony I prepared for you and her. On your 20th birthday, absorb the frost dragon origins, and your bloodline will be completely awakened. You will become the first successor of the frost dragon race, and they will have to support you to become king. Before that, I hope you can help me find them. There shouldn't be too many of a golden dragon half-dragon in Chaos City. On her 18th birthday, give her this golden dragon origin so that she can completely awaken her golden bloodline and become a real dragon. Remember, apart from her, don't trust anyone else in this world, including your people. Back then, I stepped on countless dragon bones to ascend to the throne. They only have hatred in their hearts. You only have to do one thing, become stronger than them. Continue to step on their heads, and they will learn to be humble. Golden Dragon, Sister. Elizabeth looked at the letter in her hand with a complicated expression. The paper suddenly crumbled, and fell to the ground. Father, Mother died because of you. Even though she didn't have any resentment toward you, how could you say that you fell in love with another woman? Elizabeth slowly clenched her fists, and her face turned pale. She looked at the 2 dragon origins on the table, and fell silent again. You left a woman when she was at her most vulnerable during her pregnancy. Father, is your throne really that important? You'd rather chase after a rival than find your own daughter. They're 2 pitiful women. How did they meet you? The anger in Elizabeth's eyes gradually dissipated, and she murmured to herself as she looked at the golden dragon origins in the golden box. After sending Amy to school, Meg went to the bookstore again, and filled a basket with books about the history of this world. As no race had ever ruled this world, there were no official or unofficial histories. Most of the information was recorded by bards, and Meg didn't know how reliable they were. In any case, he just treated them as leisurely reading material. Meg mainly used them to broaden his horizons. Perhaps it was because of the elven princess, Meg Alex's memory had many gaps, so his understanding of the Norland continent was actually not complete. For example, the Dragon Islands, the Undead Islands. There was very little information about them. It seemed that Irina was with him when he went to those places, so his memory was completely erased. Therefore, he could only slowly fill in his worldview with information and build a world that was completely his own. Meg went back to read for the whole afternoon, and then went to pick Amy up at around 4 o'clock. After dinner, he officially opened for business. The line outside the door was even longer than before, with hundreds of people lining up all the way into the square. It could be seen from afar, and the advertising effect was much better than standing at the door and shouting. Amy finished a plate of braised chicken and rice in front of all the customers, and orders for the braised chicken and rice, which had been crazily popular during lunch, skyrocketed again. "System, give me another casserole," Meg said in his heart as he listened to the number of orders for braised chicken that Yabamia reported. Please note that your current level of authority is too low, so you can't. The system's serious voice sounded. If sales of braised chicken and rice are doubled, the speed of upgrading the restaurant will increase by at least 1/3, right? Meg calmly said. Ding. The casserole has been placed in the third cupboard. Please accept it. Ding. The price of this order is 10 gold coins. The fee has been successfully deducted. Meg opened the third cupboard and took out an identical casserole. He nodded with satisfaction. The most time-consuming part of braised chicken was the half an hour of stewing. Increasing the number of casseroles was the easiest way to increase efficiency. Blackie looked at Anthem and asked, "Boss, are we going to keep eating, looking?" The 6 hunters walked out of a barbecue shop with big bellies. Burp. Of course we are. We've already searched 88 places. If we give up now, we'll be eating for nothing. Anthem rubbed his belly and waved his hand as he walked forward. Chapter 287. Why aren't Big Sister Cece and Big Bear here yet? Amy sat on a high stool with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She rested her chin on the counter and looked toward the door. It was already dark outside, but Lulu and Cece still hadn't arrived. Looks like Amy really likes that druid girl. Meg also noticed Amy's expectant look. She was very dependent on him, but she didn't expect much from anyone else. It's probably because he misses his mother. Meg sighed in his heart. Although he already wanted to give Amy all his love, she would definitely crave more and more motherly love as she grew older. Elves. Looks like I have to work harder at cooking. I won't be able to find Amy's mother if I'm not strong enough. Meg thought to himself as the knife in his hand moved faster and faster. Right now, the fastest way to improve his power was naturally to buy strength points from the system. However, it was also necessary for him to adapt and train his current body at night. Cece walked backward in front of Lulu with a happy and expectant look on her face. Lulu, I want to have 2 servings of braised chicken and rice, 1 sweet tofu pudding, and 1 Yangzhou fried rice tonight. What do you think? Okay, then you can eat 2 bowls less. That way, you can finish it. Lulu nodded his head dotingly. The bamboo box on his back was nowhere to be found. He pushed aside the willow branches behind Cece and followed her on hurriedly. His eyes scanned left and right as if he was constantly on guard against something. We might have to eat faster tonight. If those guys followed us to Chaos City, they're probably looking for us now, Lulu said softly. I will. Cece nodded seriously. She wasn't perfunctory about this at all. It was almost 8 p.m., so the long line outside Amy's had already disappeared. There were still customers waiting for their seats in the restaurant, but they didn't have to wait too long because customers were coming and going. Sister Cece, you're finally here. Amy's face lit up at the sight of Cece, and she slid off the high stool with Ugly Duckling in her arms before striding over to greet her. Little Amy, you're such a good girl. Of course we'll come for such delicious food, Cece smiled and reached out to stroke Amy's head. She squatted down and said matter-of-factly. Father's cooking is the best in the world. Amy nodded as she played happily with Ugly Duckling around Cece. I didn't expect the little boss to have such a side to him. But it's so cute. When the guests saw this scene, they were all surprised. After all, in the eyes of many people, this little girl dared to use a fireball to burn the lava demon. Then it's a deal, Novin. I'll get that old geezer Julian to come over in a few days, and you'll use spatial magic to cooperate with us to create a 3-in-1 magic wand. In the principal's office, Crassus waved his hand as he put away the complicated blueprint on the table and looked at Novin, who was sitting behind the table. Of course. However, you promised to teach the students of Chaos School melee magic for half an hour every month. You have to keep your promise, Novin said with a serious expression as he looked at Crassus. Are you really going to let those little brats learn? Aren't you afraid of being called a bad influence on the students? Crassus looked into Novin's eyes with an equally serious expression. If learning melee magic from the Lord of Fire Crassus is a bad influence on the students, then wouldn't I be a bad influence on the thousands of students of Chaos School? Novin asked with a smile. Crassus continued to look into Novin's eyes, and didn't reply. I think melee magic is a new path for magic casters. As the pioneer, you've already successfully walked down that path. At the same time, you've also used over 100 years to prove that melee magic can also slay dragons and vanquish gods. Just based on this point alone, melee magic should be given enough attention. Whether the children choose to learn melee magic or long-range magic, I think this decision should be in their own hands. Perhaps there will be a day when magic casters can completely get rid of the awkward situation of being unable to retaliate in close combat. Novin also wiped the smile off his face as he looked at Crassus calmly. If someone else were to say this to me, I'd just take it as a joke. However, I believe in your words, Novin. A smile appeared on Crassus' face as he nodded, and said, but I'll say this first. I'll only teach some things to my disciples. Those little brats can come and listen to my lessons, and they can also learn melee magic, but they're not my disciples. I'll only accept one disciple. Alright, but little Amy is also a student of Chaos School. Novin also nodded with a smile. I have another condition. Give me a piece of land. I want to build a magic lab, Crassus continued. How big do you want it to be? Novin asked directly. Bigger than this one, Crassus replied without holding back at all. 10 times is enough. Novin's eyes lit up. Why do you want it to be so big? Do you really think I can move the Magus Tower here? Crassus pursed his lips. If there's anyone in this world who can do it, it's probably only you. Novin also smiled as he nodded, and said, you can decide how big you want it to be. You can tear down all the houses facing the street outside the Magic Academy. They're all school property. Alright, that's enough for me. Crassus nodded with satisfaction. He raised his hand, and said, let's go. I'll treat you to dinner today. I'll show you what real delicacies are. What delicacies haven't I tasted in Chaos City? Novin didn't seem very interested, but he still got up and walked out from behind the table. Don't be so confident, kid. It's definitely something you've never tasted before, Crassus said calmly. He wasn't angry at all, and walked out first. Is it really that good? Novin looked at Crassus back with a hint of doubt, and followed him out. Burp. Burp. Burp, a series of burps came out of the hunters' mouths. Their stomachs were all bulging, and they had unknowingly walked to the west side of the square. The youngest hunter looked at Anthem, and helplessly said, Boss, from the descriptions of those owners just now, they are indeed here today. However, we've searched all 100 restaurants on the list, and still couldn't find them. What should we do now? Chapter 288. Blackie, are you sure? Anthem's eyes suddenly widened, and his beard trembled. He looked at Blackie and asked. The longbow on the horse's back was already in his hand. A full moon hung high in the sky. Hearing this, the hunters' faces lit up, and they all stared at Hazy. Yes, I'm sure. I've been looking for them for decades. I can't be wrong. The fresh smell, the familiar smell, they're in that restaurant. Blackie's eyes had turned blood red, and he nodded with certainty. Brothers, this time, we can't let them escape from us. We don't have much time left. A cruel smile appeared on Anthem's face. He held the longbow in one hand and an arrow in the other. He said in a low voice, "The hunt has begun." Ta! All the hunters took down the longbows on their horses, and their smiles were also cold. A red cloud floated in front of the moon, and it seemed to be covered with a faint layer of blood. A bloodthirsty and bloody aura appeared. Strands of blood-red light appeared around everyone. Gray-black hair appeared on their arms. Sharp claws and fangs appeared. Their eyes had already turned blood-red. They let go of the horses in their hands and surrounded the restaurant in a fan-shaped formation. No! These people are really going to attack. And their target is Mamie's. Monkey, who was leaning against a tree and yawning, suddenly changed his expression. He glanced at Mamie's, turned around, and ran away. He had been following them for the entire afternoon. Aside from the murderous intent they displayed toward the woman, they continued to visit all of the high-ranking restaurants in the Aden Square according to the Aden Square food rankings. They ate and drank as if they were a bunch of country bumpkins who had never been to a city before. As such, Brandley decided to downgrade them from a dangerous target to a potentially dangerous one, and told him to follow them and report back to him if anything were to happen. Monkey instinctively felt that they were looking for someone, but they didn't find her. Now, they seemed to have found the target, and it was in Mamie's. Whether they were looking for a guest or Mr. Mac, nothing could happen to Mamie's. This was Brandley's order and also Bazer's order, so he had to report the situation to Bazer. A sharp whistle pierced through the night sky. Monkey? Not good. Bazer turned around and looked in the direction of Amy's. His expression suddenly changed. "Captain, what's wrong?" Bob asked Bazer. "Monkey's warning. It seems that my guess was not wrong. They are indeed looking for someone, and now they have found the target. You ride back and report. Battle strength above level 7. Bazer said quickly as he ran towards Amy's with his sword in hand. He was very grateful to Meg for what happened last time, so he had to protect the restaurant. Yes. Hearing this, Bob hurriedly ran to the horse tied to the side. His expression was also very grave. 7th tier magic caster was a 7th tier magic caster, and even Captain Bazer was only a 5th tier knight. Boss, this Burning Legion's name sounds really cool. Sure enough, after going out for a trip, Boss has become even stronger. Yes, for the Burning Legion. It's also very catchy. But boss, where are you bringing us to eat today? I haven't drunk in a long time. 5 lava demons surrounded Sargeras. Apart from Keel and Mond, there were 3 other burly lava demons with unfamiliar faces. They were all looking at Sargeras excitedly, and their eyes were full of fanatical worship. I didn't name the Burning Legion, and our slogan isn't that, either. Sargeras shook his head with a hearty smile. The second batch of lava warriors who had come to Chaos City to join him had finally arrived. The Burning Legion had officially begun to expand. Although there were only 6 lava warriors now, more lava warriors would arrive in batches after receiving the notice. If Boss didn't name it, then who did? Cassis, who was wearing red armor and missing an ear, asked curiously. Yeah. Then what's our slogan? Moxa, who had a cross-shaped scar on his forehead, also asked curiously. I'm more curious about what we're going to eat later, Karzak said with a silly smile. Tonight, I'll take you to eat something that can change the fate of our lava demons, Holy Ruggiamo. The name of the Burning Legion was given by that brilliant boss who made Ruggiamo, and our slogan. Sargeras' eyes gradually became more and more fanatical as he said in a low voice, For Ruggiamo. For Ruggiamo. Keel and Mond yelled in unison. The passers-by looked at them with confusion, not knowing what they were yelling about. For Ruggiamo. Boss, is that why you asked us to come to Chaos City this time? Cassis and the others were a little confused. That's right. Sargeras nodded. He looked at the three of them with a serious expression and said, "You'll find out soon. But there are a few things you have to remember. That restaurant is the hope for our lava demons to rise again, and it will be the holy land of us lava demons in the future. No matter what happens, you have to ensure the safety of the boss and the little boss. Also, the restaurant's rules. Boss, since that boss is just a normal person, why don't we just take him away? We'll make him make Rugiamo for us every day for free." Karzak was a little confused. "If you can defeat 2 10th tier magic casters and take the boss away, you'll be the leader of the lava demons in the future," Sargeras said with a smile, and continued walking. "Well, I can't defeat them." Karzak rubbed his bald head and smiled embarrassedly. The group continued to walk forward. The 6 lava trolls walked together, and the pedestrians on the road subconsciously avoided them, casting sidelong glances at them. Werewolves. In the magic potion shop, Julian, who was mixing magic potions, looked at the door with surprise. He sniffed with his nose and raised his eyebrows. He slowly walked toward the door with his back hunched, and murmured to himself in a hoarse voice, "I haven't beaten dogs in so many years, dogs." 6. Charcoal yelled excitedly in his cage. In the restaurant, Lulu and Cece had just sat down when a braised chicken and rice and a Rugiamo was placed on the table. Cece was enjoying the braised chicken and rice. Lulu took a bite of the Rugiamo, and a happy expression appeared on her good-natured face. Right at this moment, Cece suddenly raised her head and looked in the direction of the restaurant's entrance. She exclaimed, "Lulu, they're here." Bam! Chapter 289. A head-sized hole appeared on the wooden door, and a black arrow pierced through it. The tail of the arrow quivered rapidly, and the sharp tip of the arrow glinted coldly as it pierced through Lulu's back. Although Lulu's body was huge, her speed and reaction were not slow at all. The moment she heard Cece's warning, she pressed one hand against the table and leapt into the air, while her other hand grabbed Cece's arm and pulled her up. The arrow passed under his body, pierced through the clothes on his back, and narrowly brushed past Cece's hand before nailing itself to the counter behind them. Half of the arrow was embedded into the counter, and the tail of the arrow was still quivering slightly. Warning! Warning! The restaurant is under attack. Attack level, level 7. The attack has exceeded the restaurant's defense level limit. At this moment, an ear-piercing alarm suddenly rang out in Meg's mind. At the same time, Meg also heard the sound of the wooden door shattering. His mind was instantly filled with terror, and he rushed out of the kitchen with the gold-rimmed kitchen knife in hand. He shielded Amy, who was sitting on the high stool, behind him. Seeing that she was unharmed, he breathed a sigh of relief. Looking at the arrow that had pierced through half of the counter, his expression was a little unsightly. Amy, who was sitting on the high stool, looked down at the arrow. She poked her little head out from behind Meg and asked curiously, "Father, are there bad guys causing trouble again?" "Yes, Amy, hide behind me and don't run around. The bad guys this time are very strong." Meg nodded, his expression grave. Amy's magic might be able to deal with a level 3 opponent, but the enemy this time was not someone Amy could deal with. "System, aren't you afraid that I'll be shot to death by this arrow?" Meg said in his mind, exasperated. Although the attack exceeded the restaurant's defense level, the system still made some minor adjustments to the trajectory of the arrow so that it did not injure the guest. Also, the wooden shavings on the door have been treated in chunks so that the guest's meal will not be affected. "Host, you should be thanking me," the system said calmly. Meg's heart calmed down slightly. The system's words at least proved that it still had some defensive capabilities, and that it did not want him to be killed. However, this level of defense was still a little too weak. It was urgent to upgrade the restaurant's defense level and improve the restaurant's defense. Lulu, holding on to Cece's hand as she landed heavily on the ground. She staggered, and her right hand gently around Cece's waist, her right hand. She looked in the direction of the door with a grim expression. Those guys really did come. Cece said softly as she clenched her fists. Wisps of green light rose from her body and connected her to Lulu like a thin string. It was as if a green ribbon had been tied between the two of them. What's going on? After a moment of silence, the guests looked at the gap in the wooden door and the arrow nailed to the counter. They finally realized what had happened. Some of the more timid guests screamed, but more of them looked around in panic. They did not know what had happened, but they instinctively sensed danger. The restaurant immediately fell into chaos. However, no one knew where the arrow came from, so no one acted rashly. Some people hid under the tables, but most of them remained in their seats. This arrow is very powerful. Mia, come over here. Sally stood beside Meg without him noticing. She stood half a step forward and looked at the arrow. Her expression was still cold, but her eyes were a little solemn. As a 7th-level magician and a sharpshooter, she knew how difficult it was to aim at a target through a wooden door and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Moreover, there was no magical wave on the arrow. Judging from the force used to break through the door, the person who shot it was at least 7th level. Sally was not going to make a move unless she had no other choice. Working as a waitress at Amy's was already very risky. If people found out that she was a 7th-level magician, they would probably come knocking on her door in a few days. However, Meg, Amy, and Mia were so good to her, so she naturally could not let them be in danger. The other party's target was obviously the couple. She just had to be careful not to get hurt. A light blue light lit up at her fingertips. It was not difficult for her to do this with her strength. If the other party's target was Meg and Amy, she did not believe that the Lord of Ice, who was not far away, would sit back and do nothing. All she had to do was wait until he made a move. Yabamiya looked at the gap in the wooden door and walked over with a frightened expression. She stood in front of Sally with the tray in her hand. She mustered up her courage and said, "I will block this arrow." A hint of surprise appeared in Sally's eyes at the sight of Yabamiya standing in front of her. She was clearly the weakest among all of them, yet Yabamiya had chosen to stand in front of her. She was struck by a peculiar feeling. Could it be that this was what friends were like? That little elf is not bad. Julian, who was standing outside the magic potion shop, glanced in the direction of the restaurant and nodded slightly. His black magician robe seemed to have merged with the darkness. Werewolves, I haven't seen them in so many years. I wonder if that old dog is still alive. Julian's gaze fell on the hunters who had drawn their bows and fanned out outside the restaurant. The tips of their arrows were all pointed in the direction of the restaurant. A faint red light was emitted from their bodies, and the air was filled with the smell of blood. Although they still maintained their human forms, their blood-red eyes were filled with the color of blood. "Why are you all so panicked, Brandley?" At the entrance of the Aiden Square, a black horse-drawn carriage pulled up the curtain, and Novin turned to look at Brandley, who was riding past a member of the inspection office. "Principal." Brandley hurriedly reined in his horse upon hearing this voice. He was both elated and anxious as he said, "The inspection office has reported that someone is stirring up trouble in Chaos City. The target is extremely dangerous." "Stirring up trouble? Where is it?" Krasu also turned to Brandley with a question in his eyes. "You're here too, Master Crassus." According to the report, their target seems to be Amy's. Brandley was slightly startled to hear Crassus' voice, but he still hurriedly replied. The main reason why he had rushed here in such a hurry was because of Amy's. If something were to happen to Amy, who knew what kind of wrath the Lord of Ice and the Lord of Fire would have to bear? Let's go. Amy's. Crass's voice immediately became cold with a hint of concern. Monkey lowered his eyes and didn't dare to say anything. There were two important figures in the horse-drawn carriage that even Master Brandley had to treat with respect, so he obediently led the way. Thus, 2 horses and a black horse-drawn carriage set off toward Amy's. Chapter 290. The restaurant instantly fell silent, and everyone's eyes fell on Lulu and Cece. Not everyone in the restaurant was a powerless commoner, but the arrow just now was enough to make them sit down in fear of harming the innocent. Even a knight wouldn't act recklessly for the sake of 2 strangers without knowing the reason. However, judging from the arrow and the words just now, those who dared to make a move on the streets of Chaos City and even threatened to kill everyone in the restaurant were definitely not kind people. Since they were here for them, they would have to rely on them to solve the problem. Little Amy had 2 masters who were great magic casters, so those who knew about this weren't worried that someone would really dare to kill Amy's. Perhaps even the Grey Temple wouldn't dare to do something like that. Kill them all. How arrogant. Meg raised his eyebrows. Threatening customers was a serious blow to the restaurant's reputation, and it also made him very angry. He directly asked in his mind, "System, how much is a Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle?" "You can't afford it," the system replied very quickly. Meg was speechless, but he still didn't give up. "I want a loan." "The system doesn't provide loan services. The host's elephant food bar credit is now 100 gold coins, so you can't afford it either," the system replied calmly. "You win." Meg felt a little helpless. It seemed like the idea of getting a gun from the system wouldn't work at all. The system probably wouldn't charge a low price for something that could be classified as a weapon of mass destruction. It was really doing its best to maintain the stability of this world. It didn't even want to earn money. Julian should be here by now, right? How did these 2 people provoke those guys outside? They have been hunting them for decades. Could it have something to do with the massacre of the Druids? Meg looked at Lulu and Cece, the Druid couple. A few questions flashed through his mind, but he didn't rush to say anything. The situation was unclear, and he wasn't sure if Julian was here, so standing behind Sally was the best choice. He knew that Sally was a 7th-tier magic caster, but he was also a little touched that Yabamiya was standing in front of him. It seemed a little silly to value others more than oneself, but it was indeed very cute, 20 years ago. A hint of pain appeared on Cece's face, and she subconsciously clenched her fists. They had stayed in that village for 1 night, and the entire village was slaughtered by those people. Even the newborn children weren't spared. The 2 listened to the desperate screams behind them. Those kind villagers died one after another. They stayed in the forest for more than 3 years, and they didn't see a single person. And now, the same choice was placed in front of them, just like 20 years ago when they were blocked by the red-eyed werewolves in the village. They dared to say that, and they dared to do it. They were a bunch of heartless executioners. "Don't worry, the same thing won't happen again," Lulu said with certainty as she held Cece's hand tightly. "Big Sister Cece, are the bad guys here to make trouble for you?" Amy climbed onto the high stool, and put Ugly Duckling on Meg's other shoulder. She poked her little head out of the other shoulder, and looked at Cece with a completely unconcerned expression. Meow, Ugly Duckling, who was standing on Meg's shoulder, was a little afraid of heights. It put its 4 feet together, and tried its best to lean toward Meg's head with a fearful expression. Cece seemed to have regained her strength after being held by Lulu. She turned to Amy with a reluctant expression, and nodded as she said, "That's right, little Amy. We won't see each other again for a long time. I'll miss you." "Why?" "Big Sister Cece likes father's food so much." Why don't you stay in Chaos City? That way, you can come here every day. Amy looked at Cece with a puzzled expression. Then, she looked outside the restaurant, and seriously said, as for the bad guys, Amy can chase them away with a fireball. I'm afraid I can't do that this time. Cece shook her head sadly. The World Tree's rebirth was right in front of them, but they had to leave now. Otherwise, it would only bring disaster to everyone present. They didn't want to see the misfortune of the past happen again. Let's go. Lulu stroked Cece's hair gently. She took a step forward, and her clothes were all torn apart. She instantly transformed into a huge black bear that was nearly 3 meters tall. Her fur was black, and she covered more than 2 meters with each step. She slapped the dilapidated door of the restaurant, and rushed out sideways. She leaped high into the air, and pounced on Anthem, who was standing in the center of the restaurant. Her huge bear paw, which was as thick as a hammer, smashed toward his head. Sorry. Goodbye. Cece said. Her body flashed with green light, and she instantly transformed into a white cat that was half a meter long. Green light rose from her feet, and she rushed out of the restaurant behind the big bear. She was slender and strong, and her speed was also very fast. A light green silk thread was still connecting the two of them. However, the couple who had just been showing off their love had now turned into a black bear and a white cat in the blink of an eye. This change made the customers in the restaurant widen their eyes involuntarily as they looked at this scene in shock. System, you should have a backup door, right? Meg looked at the empty door, and his eyelids twitched. It had only been a few days, and 2 of the doors had been broken. How could he open the restaurant in peace? I have enough stock, the system replied calmly. You have foresight. Meg pursed his lips. He felt that the system's words sounded a little fishy. It was as if it had already known that the door would continue to be broken. Wow! Big Bear is really a big bear. Big Sister Cece has turned into a beautiful cat, but why does she look a little like Ugly Duckling? Amy also widened her eyes at this scene. She wrapped her arms around Meg's neck, and said anxiously, Father, let's go and help. Amy has to beat up the bad guys. We can't let them bully Big Sister Cece. No, it's too dangerous. Meg shook his head and untied Amy's arms from around his neck. He turned around and looked into her eyes, and said seriously, Amy, you have to remember that the premise of helping others is that you won't be in danger. I don't want to see you get hurt. But... Amy looked into Meg's eyes, and then looked toward the door. Her blue eyes were clear and bright, and she asked seriously, Father, shouldn't we protect the people we love? I like Big Sister Cece, and I don't want her to get hurt. So, can we help her? Of course. Meg looked at Amy's expectant eyes, and was silent for a while. Then, a smile appeared on his face. He picked up Amy in one hand and held the gold-rimmed kitchen knife in the other, and walked toward the door of the restaurant. Chapter 291. The giant black bear slammed the door and stepped on the ground with a bang. It jumped high and slapped Anthem with its paw. The black shadow hung down, and the huge bear paw whistled with the wind. It was very oppressive. Howl. Anthem raised his head and howled. There was no panic in his eyes. The blood-red color became more and more intense. Instead of retreating, he took a step forward. His body grew taller, his clothes were torn, and his normal face twisted into a huge black wolf head. He had turned into a 3-meter-tall werewolf in an instant. Gray wolf hair covered his whole body, and his claws were sharp. The werewolf stomped on the ground heavily, shattering the bluestone slabs on the ground. He leaped high toward the giant bear, raising his sharp claws with a touch of blood red flowing on them. He clawed at the giant bear's chest. Bang! The two 3-meter-tall giant beasts collided in midair, producing a heavy muffled sound. The blood-red claws tore through the giant bear's broad chest, leaving behind a bloody wound. At the same time, the giant bear's paw also slapped the werewolf's face. Half of the werewolf's face was distorted, and one of its teeth flew out. The giant bear and the werewolf fell to the ground at the same time and took a few steps back. Then they collided again. The giant bear's claws left wounds on the giant bear's body, while the giant bear's paw left dents on the werewolf's body. Bang, bang, bang. After separating, they collided again and again. Their attacks were extremely violent. It was hard to imagine that these two giant beasts could have such terrifying speed. The stone slabs on the ground outside the restaurant were pulverized under their feet, and a tree that was as thick as a person's encirclement was snapped in half. All of the customers in the restaurant were stunned by the sight of flesh and blood flying everywhere. It was very rare to see such a scene in Chaos City. Thrilling was not enough to describe it. At this moment, a white cat leaped out of the dining hall, stepping on a green light. The green light flashed, and a green 3-leaf clover mark appeared between the white cat's eyebrows. The green ribbons that connected the two of them suddenly brightened. The giant bear's body was instantly covered with a layer of green light, and the green light kept flowing into his wounds. The bleeding stopped, and the wounds healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. His body suddenly swelled up, and he slapped Anthem away. Catch her! Anthem's sharp claws left a shocking crack on the ground. He turned his head and spat out a mouthful of blood. He glanced at the nimble white cat and cried out. The werewolves fired their crossbows in unison, and several arrows simultaneously sealed off the white cat's escape route. Decades of hunting cooperation had given them a strong tacit understanding. Awoo! 3 of the werewolves raised their heads and howled. Their bodies grew to more than 2 meters tall, and they were also half-wolf and half-human werewolves. They landed on all fours and rushed towards Cece. They could lose the team battle, but the healer had to die. There was a trace of panic in the white cat's pale golden eyes. A green light flashed under its feet, and its speed suddenly increased by a notch, narrowly dodging the arrows that were shot at it. A few black seeds fell to the ground, and with a sweep of green light, they instantly sprouted and grew into green vines, entangling the 3 werewolves that were pouncing at it. Meanwhile, the white cat climbed up the side of the wall and ran up in a snake-like manner, narrowly avoiding the arrows that were shot at it. 2 druids. A hint of surprise appeared on Urian's face as he looked at the giant bear and the white cat that were connected by a green thread. He cast his gaze toward the white cat that was flashing nimbly on the wall, and murmured to himself, "If I recall correctly, the heart of the world tree disappeared back then." Could it be? With Cece's support, Lulu's momentum instantly overshadowed Anthem's. He stamped his feet on the ground and rushed toward Anthem again. Then, he smashed Anthem's head into the ground with his palm. The huge wolf's head sank into the ground, and cracks spread out from his body. Boss! The werewolves were all shocked by this scene. They didn't expect that the big bear's strength had increased after a while, and now it was even suppressing Anthem. However, they still didn't know what the situation was. The 3 werewolves tore apart the growing vines. They didn't rush to chase Cece, who was dodging the arrows on the wall. Instead, they surrounded Lulu in a triangular formation. After decades of hunting, no one knew them better than they did. The white cat was fast and agile, but its ability was more inclined towards healing and helping others to improve their fighting strength. It was not easy to catch up with it. The big bear was powerful enough, but it lacked flexibility and speed. It was almost impossible to escape from their encirclement in this terrain. As long as they could catch the big bear, the white cat wouldn't go far. Without the white cat's magic, they couldn't even defeat Anthem. They had always lived and died together, which was their Achilles heel. Anthem was smashed into the ground by Lulu's fists. Every sound was particularly dull. It seemed that Lulu had gained the upper hand. At this moment, a red cloud floated over the bright moon in the sky. The pale red moonlight fell on everyone, and the bloodthirsty aura of the werewolf soared in an instant. The werewolf, who had been suppressed by Big Bear and had no power to fight back, suddenly burst out with a red light. He raised his sharp claws, which were dyed red with bloodlust, and directly tore open a bloody wound on Big Bear's chest. Then, he raised his leg and kicked Big Bear's abdomen, directly sending him flying 5 or 6 meters and crashing into a row of trees. Blood Moon, give me endless power. Anthem slowly stood up. The red moonlight shone on his body, and his completely deformed head began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye. The gray wolf hair grew longer, and the outermost layer was dyed with a layer of red, as if it was on fire. Eat, brave werewolves, the flesh and blood of the enemy is the most delicious food. Anthem's face showed a cruel smile, and his momentum had been raised to the extreme, more terrifying than before. The 3 sharp claws on his right hand stretched half a meter long, and he strode toward Lulu. Awoo! The rest of the werewolves transformed in an instant and rushed toward Lulu on all 4s. It seemed that they were going to eat her first. Go! Lulu let loose an enraged roar in Cece's direction. The wound on his chest was so deep that his bones were visible, and the red light from the wound was corroding the healing green light. However, Lulu had no intention of backing down. He stood up with a thick tree in his arms, and charged toward the 6 werewolves who were baring their sharp fangs and red eyes. Chapter 292. Ha! What's going on? Is someone fighting? Boss, didn't you say people shouldn't fight in Chaos City? Kossuth and Karzak asked curiously, craning their necks to look in the direction of Amy's. It shouldn't be. Sargeras raised his eyebrows. Even he didn't dare to make trouble in Chaos City. After all, the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle both had 10th tier combat power. Oh no! It seems that someone is making trouble in Mr. Mack's place. It's our mission to protect Mr. Mack. Prepare to fight. Sargeras soon saw the place where the fight was taking place. His expression became very serious, and he strode quickly toward Amy's. Fight! Keel, Mont, and the others' eyes lit up, and they quickly followed Sargeras. They hadn't fought side by side for many years, and this time, they were fighting for the Holy Regiamo. Ha, you're finally willing to come down. Anthem's voice came from under the net of vines. His sharp red claws tore the vines apart in an instant. He jumped high, and his sharp claws slashed down at Cece, who was flying in the air. Watch out! Lulu exclaimed, and the tree in her hand chopped down at Anthem. A touch of panic flashed through Cece's eyes. A turquoise light rose from under her feet, and at the same time, a small turquoise shield appeared under her. Crack! The small shield shattered almost instantly. Although Cece's speed had increased, she still couldn't escape from the claws. The sharp claws tore her abdomen, and she flew upside down and landed at the entrance of the restaurant. Her snow-white fur was dyed red in an instant. She couldn't maintain her cat form anymore, and turned back into her human form. She lay on her side on the ground, blood gushing out of the wound on her abdomen. Her face was pale, and she couldn't move. Ah! Lulu's eyes were bloodshot, and she swung the tree at Anthem. Anthem crossed his hands above his head, and was smashed down from the air. His feet sank half a meter into the ground, and his sharp claws cut the thick wood into pieces. He walked toward Lulu step by step, and said in a cold voice, "Kill her." All the werewolves turned their eyes to Cece in unison. They grinned cruelly, and their sharp claws rubbed against each other, making a grinding sound. They had been waiting for this moment for many years. As long as they killed her, everything would be over. Enjoying the enemy's flesh and blood was the best way to celebrate. Cece's tea. Lulu roared desperately. She wanted to rush to the door crazily, but Anthem slapped her back. The blood-red claws left several bloody holes on her body. Without the help of the green light, her momentum was declining rapidly. Lulu. Go. Cece looked up at Lulu, her eyes full of heartache and reluctance, but she still shouted with all her strength. "None of you can leave today." Anthem waved his claws again and scratched off half of Lulu's shoulder. Blood gushed out, and her whole arm was almost torn off. All the werewolves walked toward Cece. Lulu had no power to resist under Anthem's claws. The bloodthirsty effect of the blood moon made his hands more powerful than before. The customers in the restaurant and the surrounding crowd couldn't bear to see this scene, but in the face of such a terrifying and bloodthirsty werewolf, no one dared to step forward to help the poor couple. Some even turned their faces away, not wanting to see the cruel scene that was about to unfold. The target is extremely dangerous. Pity, bravery, sacrifice. Bazar looked at the werewolves walking towards Cece and slowly pulled out the long sword at his waist. 5 level 4 and 5 werewolves were far more powerful than him, but as a knight and a member of the Inspector of the Grey Temple, his mission was to go against the rules. It is indeed the heart of the World Tree, and a new World Tree has been bred. Unfortunately, it has withered. Urian looked at Cece's lower abdomen, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he murmured to himself, "The nature magic of the druids is comparable to the life magic of the elven race, but without the World Tree, they won't be able to cultivate, and the druids will have no hope of ever rising again. So be it. That old guy asked me to find those 2 little guys for him. Looks like they're the 2. Julian looked at the werewolves walking towards Cece and took half a step forward. In the darkness, streaks of frost appeared under his feet. The werewolves had raised their claws. Facing Cece, who had no power to fight back, they could crush her with one claw and bathe them in fresh blood. Stop! At this moment, a shout came from the restaurant. The leading werewolf was stunned. He looked into the restaurant and saw a human man standing at the door with a child in one hand and a gold-rimmed kitchen knife in the other. The voice came from him. All of the customers in the restaurant and the passers-by outside also turned to look at Mag in unison with astonishment in their eyes. Who would have thought that someone would dare to come out in the face of a bloodthirsty werewolf? Mr. Mac is crazy. The 2 magic casters are not here today. Mr. Mac is indeed a man of character. He actually dashed out with a kitchen knife. His courage and guts make me feel ashamed. Although Little Boss is powerful, she is still much weaker than those werewolves. What if she gets hurt? Everyone couldn't help but discuss softly and nervously when they saw this scene. They were still very interested in Meg and his daughter. After all, they couldn't taste such delicacies other than Amy's. Many customers who were prepared to watch quietly began to gather magic or grab the weapons beside them. Big Sister Cece. Amy looked at Cece, who was lying in a pool of blood, and struggled to jump from Meg's arms to the ground. She ran over to her and looked at her with concern in her eyes. Little Amy, go away. Cece looked up at Amy, and shook her head with concern on her pale face. If they were destined to die here today, she didn't want to see innocent people die because of them, especially the adorable little Amy. Bad people. Stupid dog. I won't let you bully Big Sister Cece and Big Bear. Amy spread open her arms and stood in front of Cece. 2 balls of bluish-purple flames rose from her little hands. Little girl, you've got guts. Having the heart of a powerhouse is the foundation of becoming a true powerhouse. I didn't misjudge you. Julian's footsteps faltered as he looked at Amy. However, a black wand had already appeared on his fingertips, and there seemed to be a hint of cold light shimmering on its tip. It's been a long time since I've tasted a child. I really do miss it. Why don't we try it again today? This little girl must taste really good. The werewolf leader looked at Amy, and licked his lips with a hint of lust in his eyes. I'll think of 100 ways to kill you if you say something like that. Mag withdrew his gaze from the magic potion shop out of the corner of his eye, and stood in front of Amy with his cleaver in hand. His expression was extremely cold. In that instant, his thirst for power became extremely strong. If he were powerful enough, this cleaver would be in that werewolf's head right now. Kill me. The werewolf threw his head back and roared with laughter at the sight of Meg and the kitchen knife in his hand. He raised his sharp claws and slashed down at Meg. Stupid and cowardly human. How dare you threaten me? He sneered. Red light flashed on his sharp claws. If those claws fell on Meg, they would most likely kill him instantly. Julian raised his hand, and Beza rushed out of the crowd with his sword. Many passers-by looked away or closed their eyes. They didn't want to see such a kind father and daughter lose their lives trying to protect a stranger. Protect Mr. Mac. For the Ruggiemo. At this moment, a powerful roar suddenly sounded from behind. A figure covered in flames rushed over like a meteor. In the blink of an eye, he arrived at the entrance of the restaurant. A black iron chair whizzed through the air and smashed into the face of the werewolf who had raised his sharp claws, instantly sending him flying. For the Ruggiemo. Chapter 293. Basil was already halfway to the werewolf with his sword drawn. Sally, who was standing behind Meg, was ready to strike. Yabamiya, who was standing behind them, threw the tray over their heads and smashed it at the werewolf. Bang! The werewolf that raised its sharp claws at Mag was smashed in the face by a black folding chair. Its horrifying wolf head was deformed, and then it was sent flying in an instant. Half of its fangs were knocked off by a flying tray in midair, and it landed 10 meters away with a loud crash. Who dares to hurt Mr. Mac? I'm here. Sargeras, who was holding a black foldable chair in one hand and standing in front of Mag, said domineeringly, "Don't worry, I'm going to kill you." Red lava was flowing in the cracks, and white smoke was rising from the air. The tall Sargeras was like a burning torch in the dark, making everyone's eyes light up. What? Meg looked at Sargeras in surprise and confusion. He had let Amy stand in front of Cece because Julian and Sally were standing behind them. These werewolves, who were obviously only at level 4 or level 5, couldn't pose any threat to them. However, he didn't expect Sargeras to appear out of nowhere and send that werewolf flying with a folding chair. Mag was a little touched, but when he thought of the slogan they had shouted earlier, his lips twitched uncontrollably. For Ruggiemo. What kind of stupid slogan is that? Mag cursed inwardly, but he didn't know where to start all of a sudden. However, since Sargeras had made his move, and Urian was on his side, today's battle would be over, and he felt much more at ease. He was sent flying. Isn't that the lava demon who comes to the restaurant every day to eat Ruggiemo? I didn't expect him to be so powerful. No wonder Mr. Mac didn't panic at all. He didn't care about those werewolves at all. He's hiding such a powerful fighter. When the customers in the restaurant saw this scene, they couldn't help but open their mouths wide in shock. Sargeras was no stranger to the regulars. After all, he always brought his own chair and only ordered Ruggiemo. It was hard not to remember him when he ate with fire all over his body. However, he usually behaved very honestly in the restaurant. He only sat at the entrance of the restaurant and often taught the two lava demons that came with him to eat quietly. They didn't expect him to be so powerful after entering battle mode. His attacks were even more efficient. That slap on the werewolf's face seemed to have vented all the anger that had accumulated in everyone's hearts, making them feel comfortable to their heart's content. Mr. Mac is really something. Everyone's eyes fell on Meg, who was standing at the door calmly with a kitchen knife in hand. Not everyone had the mentality of being able to remain calm in the face of a landslide. A lava demon at the peak of 7th tier. Sally looked at Sardra's back, and the blue light in her hand disappeared. She had a clear judgment in her mind. In this case, there was no need for her to make a move. She turned to Cece, who was lying at the door, and murmured a few spells. A pale blue light fell on her lower abdomen, and the red light on the wound faded quickly, and the bleeding stopped. So powerful. Yabamiya looked at Sardra's back, and couldn't help but open his mouth. He didn't expect this demon, who was always so friendly to him, to be so powerful. He sent the werewolf flying with just one slap. Amy poked her head out from behind Meg, and said happily, "Wow, big bald head, you're awesome." It's not a problem to deal with a few wolf puppies. Sargeras looked back with an honest smile, as if this was the first time that Amy had praised him. He glanced at the werewolves, who had stepped back subconsciously, and grinned. He waved his hand at Keel and the others, who were charging at him with flames all over their bodies, and said, "Burning Legion, attack." For Ruggiamo. Keel and the others roared in unison, and rushed at the werewolves, waving their maces, black iron bars, and other weapons. Awoo! The werewolves were not afraid. They howled and also rushed at the Burning Legion, waving their sharp claws. They collided with each other with a loud bang. Sharp claws and weapons collided with each other, making ear-piercing sounds. Blood and lava splashed in all directions. With a series of muffled sounds, the battle instantly became chaotic. There are so many nosy people in this place. Who gave you the courage to provoke our werewolf warriors? Anthem slapped away Lulu, who had transformed into a big bear, with his paw. Lulu, who had been sent flying several meters away, turned back into her human form. Her whole body was stained with blood, and there were horrible bumps and hollows all over her body. She lay on her back on the ground, making hoarse sounds in her throat. She turned her head to look in the direction of the restaurant's entrance, trying to find Cece. "Probably, Ruggiamo," Sargeras said with a grin. Sargeras grinned. He carried the iron chair with one hand and strode toward Anthem. Every step he took left a lava pit on the ground. "You're courting death." Anthem snorted and also strode toward Sargeras. He opened his hands, and his half-meter-long red claws looked a little strange in the moonlight. He crossed his hands and slashed at Sargeras's neck. "Get out of here." Sargeras yelled as he swung the folding chair in his hand directly at Isam's face, creating a whistling sound as it pierced through the air. The red claws collided with the iron chair first. The claws could easily break the thick skin of the bear, but they could only cause a string of sparks on the chair. Accompanied by a series of clanking sounds, the folding chair continued to slap Anthem in the face. Bang! The werewolf, who was more than 3 meters tall, flew backward as if he had been hit by a truck. He landed heavily on the ground 5 meters away, making a big pit. "Who gave you the courage to attack Mr. Mac?" Sargeras walked toward Anthem, who was struggling to get up, with the chair in his hand. His voice was full of sarcasm. Although they were both at level 7, he had been at that level for decades. Besides, he had eaten so many Ruggiamos recently. It was estimated that he was only 100 or 200 Ruggiamos away from level 8. That was why Sargeras called Ruggiamo Holy Ruggiamo. As long as you eat Ruggiamo, you can become stronger. Is there a simpler way? In this world, only Meg could make Rigiamo like this. Therefore, his safety was related to the revival of the lava race. These fellows attacked Boss Mag because they wanted to destroy the lava tribe's hope. The enemy had to die. Chapter 294. Lava Demons. It's been a long time since there was an 8th-tier lava demon, right? That damned old man was a lava demon when he first started playing melee magic, right? Urian also withdrew his hand, and looked at Sardra's back with a hint of surprise. Their strong physiques allowed them to choose to engage in close combat, and their almost monstrous affinity for fire gave them unparalleled talent for fire magic. It could be said that all lava demons were born fire-type magic casters. Their powerful melee combat abilities and fearsome fire magic talent had made this race famous in the history of the Norland continent, and they had even been ranked as one of the top 10 demon races. However, several hundred years ago, the Lava Demon clan had suffered some kind of unforeseen event. It was as if they had been cursed, and the younger members of the clan could not even break through the Tier 3 seal. Those who could reach Tier 6 and above had become rare geniuses. The strength of the Lava clan declined sharply. After the powerful warriors in the clan gradually withered away, they were involved in the racial war. The once powerful demon clan was almost wiped out. Now, no one knew where they were living in seclusion on the demon island. It was very rare to see them walking on the continent. This demon's strength surprised him. He was at the peak of the 7th tier. He should be very close to the 3rd tier seal. He was most likely the most powerful member of the lava demons now. A level 10 lava demon is truly a war machine. Urian withdrew his gaze, and thought to himself, compared to pure warriors and magic casters, this kind of dual attribute guy has the ability to change the outcome of a battle. Andham looked at Sardras, who was walking towards him with a chair in his hand. For the first time, there was a trace of panic in his blood-red eyes. The previous collision had made him feel the terrifying power of Sardras, and the rising flames on Sardra's body directly destroyed all his bloodlust. Now, he was almost completely suppressed. Even though his strength had been raised to the extreme under the blood moon, he still felt powerless in the face of this big guy with flames all over his body. Going against us werewolves is the stupidest decision you've ever made in your life. No matter where you are in the future, be ready to be hunted by werewolf warriors at any time. Live forever. Andham said in a cold voice. The red light on his red claws became brighter and brighter. It seemed that he was trying to negotiate. Bang! The only response he got was a folding chair slamming into his face. He had clearly seen Sardras raise his hand, clearly saw the trajectory of the folding chair, and even felt the wind brought by the chair. However, he felt that he could not avoid it. He raised his sharp claws to block in front of him, but was still slapped back into the large pit where he had just stood up. If you want to fight, cut the crap. Sardras strode over, gripped the legs of the chair with both hands, and hit Anselm, who was trying to get up in a daze. Bang! 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 A series of dull thuds rang out. Everyone's jaws dropped as they watched Anthem, who seemed to have everything under his control and was about to go on a killing spree, being slammed into the pit by Sardra's chair without the slightest ability to fight back. In the end, such a powerful werewolf was actually defeated by a folding chair. This scene was shocking and somewhat comical, and the tension that had been building up earlier instantly disappeared. At the same time, Kiel, Mond, and the others successfully encircled and annihilated the remaining 4 werewolves. They were all beaten to the ground, and the weapons in their hands were unceremoniously thrown at them. They didn't have the slightest ability to fight back. If they were hunting in the forest, the werewolves might have an advantage in terms of speed and stealth. However, in a face-to-face battle like this, they had gone through life and death on the Undead Islands, and they were no weaker than anyone of the same level. This was under the premise that Sargeras had asked them not to use magic. But did they protect Mr. Mac because of Ruggiemo? A customer in the restaurant asked with a strange look. Not only that, but their slogan seems to be "For Ruggiemo." Another person nodded. That's probably the charm of Mr. Mac's food, a skinny young man said excitedly. I just thought that I might not be able to eat such delicious tofu pudding again, and I wanted to fight that werewolf with my chopsticks. The others looked at his thin arms and legs, but they didn't show any sarcasm. Instead, they nodded in agreement. He was not the only one who wanted to fight just now. I didn't know that lava demons were so powerful. But in this case, compared to slowly upgrading the restaurant, relying on the strength of the customers is a good way to improve the security of the restaurant. Meg's eyes lit up, and an idea popped into his mind. Of course, spontaneously fighting for justice was very uncertain, so it was urgent to improve their own strength and the restaurant's security. The bad guys were all beaten down by Baldy and Baldy too. It turns out that Baldy is quite powerful. Amy, who was standing behind Meg, looked at the scene with wide eyes. Suddenly, she thought of something. She quickly turned around and squatted down. Looking at Cece's pale face, she asked worriedly, Sister Cece, are you all right? Save Lulu. Cece's face was as pale as a sheet of paper, but her eyes were fixed on Lulu, who was lying on the ground. Her voice was very weak. There was still a red glow on her wound, and the blood still hadn't stopped flowing. Sister Isha, can you save Sister Cece and Big Bear? You're the only one who can save them. Amy looked up at Isha and asked anxiously and earnestly. If Isha could cure Father's hand, she could definitely save Sister Cece and Big Bear. Mag also turned to look at Sally. She was indeed the only one present who had the ability to do so. However, if she didn't want to expose her identity, then it would be best for her to stay on the sidelines and protect herself. Sally did indeed look hesitant. Life magic was different from ordinary healing magic. Anyone with a little knowledge could easily tell that she was using life magic. If she did that, there was a high chance that her identity would be exposed. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.